I have to say that it's a true honor for me to be able to welcome you today for this final debate on Culture at Work Africa. It's a project that has brought us into a real dynamic and not only dynamic, but also very inspiring journey since almost 3 years, since 2018. And for decades, Bozar has had this privilege of collaborating with numerous Afro-European and African artists and projects also on the African continent. And for us, it's always been important. We always believe and still do that it is important to give and to hear the voices of such a multifaceted region. Bozar is a multidisciplinary art center, and from there we are looking towards the future, and it's also our responsibility to be able to look back in the past also in a critical way, whilst presenting the new contemporary societal dynamics and the challenges that go with this, but doing this through the prism of arts and culture. Bozar, the Nigerian curator, used to say that 1 billion people live in Africa who make use of their imaginative, conceptual, and design frameworks every day in a very complex and innovative way, and in ways that sustain ideas, life, and communities. Culture at Work supported 33 social-cultural projects in 15 African countries, and I think we can say that this is really backing Bozar's statement. As the online guided tour of the Culture at Work Africa multimedia digital showcase will show you in a minute, the results of these projects are going to present how creative and cultural communities, as well as cultural mediators, are addressing questions of social inclusion, conflict prevention, as well as the intercultural dialogue. So for Bozar, I am sure for all the partners that this is going to demonstrate how the imaginaries and how the shared narratives can play a real essential role in building inclusive and local communities and fostering trans-border synergies. After the preliminary discussions that took place in Abidjan and Paris in the last few weeks, the panel of today will cast a light on this reality and perhaps, let's hope, pave also the way to new Culture at Work Africa initiatives in the future. I would also like to thank the European Commission for engaging into this speculative and yet forward-looking journey, and we definitely hope it's only the beginning. And I also would like to thank all the partners, the coordination of the consortium, InterArts, who have all been working really, soul and body to make this possible. And my final and deepest thanks go to all the local projects who took part in this initiative and who are real testimonies of the incredible creative and transformative energy. So I'm gonna leave it here. I thank you all, and I hope you will have a very inspiring afternoon and discussions. And to give food to your thoughts, we will first invite you to follow the online guided tour of Culture at Work Africa. We have a guide who's Beatrice Sibi, and after that visit, which will take about 40 minutes, I guess, we will have the privilege to have an introduction word by Mrs. Annika Floren, who's head of the Unit for Youth, Education and Culture at the Directorate General International Partnerships at the European Commission. So that's my introduction and my welcome to you. And I think we can now invite Beatrice Sibi to start the guided tour. Thank you so much.
Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à cette conférence. Je vais introduire cette conférence avec les résultats du projet de Culture at Work Africa, et encore un petit mot sur la genèse de ce projet avant de commencer. Alors, Culture at Work Africa est né à partir d'une résolution d'un programme qui a été adopté par l'ONU en 2015, un programme de développement durable avec 17 objectifs et un agenda à 2030. Donc l'idée, c'est de faire face aux défis mondiaux actuels en termes de pauvreté, en termes d'inégalité, de changement climatique, mais aussi de justice et de paix en général, afin de créer un avenir meilleur pour chacun et chacune d'entre nous. Parallèlement à ça, l'Union africaine a également, en 2015, adopté un programme, et c'est un programme avec 7 objectifs, donc 7 aspirations, avec un agenda à plus long terme, à savoir 2063. L'idée, c'est de construire une Afrique intégrée, prospère et pacifique, et surtout une Afrique qui soit dirigée par ses propres citoyens et qui puisse donc représenter sur la scène internationale une véritable force dynamique. Alors, Culture at Work Africa, la culture au travail en Afrique, va s'inscrire directement dans l'une de ces 7 aspirations de l'Union africaine, à savoir comment la culture et surtout le dialogue interculturel peut mener à la cohésion sociale et au développement durable. C'est un projet qui a été financé par un consortium de 8 organisations et réseaux culturels à la fois africains, européens et internationaux. Nous avons également 3 partenaires associés africains et un cofinancement de la Direction générale développement et coopération de la Commission européenne. 15 pays ont pu être bénéficiaires de ce financement, 15 pays africains à la fois francophones et anglophones. Et à la fin, ce sont 33 projets qui auront été conçus et retenus. Comment est-ce que ce dialogue interculturel peut créer la cohésion sociale en Afrique urbaine, puisqu'il s'agit de projets qui sont surtout qui concernent les villes et aussi les banlieues. Le mot interculturel ici est assez important, puisque on essaye de faire comprendre que l'Afrique, ce n'est pas un bloc monolithique et uniforme. L'Afrique est un continent immense avec une variété de cultures, de langues et de peuples, et que donc ce dialogue interculturel a un réel sens pour la cohésion sociale. Par exemple, en Europe, on ne va pas avoir beaucoup de problèmes à se dire qu'un Italien, un Portugais, ne sont pas tout à fait les mêmes Européens qu'un Norvégien ou un Suédois. Et pourtant, ils sont européens, ils ont la même couleur de peau, mais ce sont des cultures différentes. En Afrique également, on a un Ivoirien qui ne sera pas forcément le même être humain qu'un Congolais ou qu'un Ougandais. Ils ont beau partager le même continent et être éventuellement de la même couleur de peau, ce sont des cultures différentes et nous avons quelquefois au sein d'un même pays des cultures différentes, comme par exemple en République démocratique du Congo, puisque c'est un pays qui en soi est immense. Donc, Culture at Work Africa va interroger le dialogue interculturel et s'en servir comme acteur de cohésion sociale en Afrique urbaine. On a posé la question à différents bénéficiaires de savoir quelle est la valeur publique de ce dialogue interculturel. Et je vous propose de les écouter et de voir comment eux voient ce fameux dialogue interculturel.
People coming together to share.
An art of mending cultural fragmentation. Il permet de mettre ensemble, de valoriser ce que l'autre a de bon.
De savoir quelles sont les valeurs que chacun de nous porte.
It gives a window into how people think, how they relate to each other.
Chacun reconnaît qu'il a sa propre culture.
C'est créer des ponts, créer des conversations entre les cultures, trouver des points de convergence.
Talk about anything.
This brings peace. This brings unity.
This brings social engagement and social cohesion.
One way of accepting and embracing diversity.
Construire des ponts, des passerelles.
Going past the stereotypes that we have of each other.
On s'enrichit mutuellement à travers la culture de l'autre.
C'est la façon dont chacun respire, la façon dont chacun se tient debout, et embrasser ça comme autant de possibles.
To engage, to feed off each other different knowledges.
C'est déjà de permettre à chacun de s'exprimer, de comprendre l'autre.
Coming to terms and coming to an understanding of each other's differences.
C'est un dialogue infini. Il n'y a pas de point aux questions posées ni aux réponses.
C'est le trait d'union qui rassemble, qui facilite les échanges.
Une rencontre entre deux cultures et dans le respect de l'autre.
Vivre avec la différence sans nécessairement la faire disparaître.
It recognizes that people are situated within the context of their own cultures.
People from very different cultures coming together and trying to work together and work in synergy.
Places where we can collaborate, work together.
Le trait d'union entre les humains.
Le ciment fort du tissu du lien social.
Le foyer d'entente et de mise ensemble.
Thriving and excelling together. You can call it development if you want.
Voilà, il semble que tout le monde s'accorde quand même sur l'utilité publique de ce fameux dialogue interculturel. Culturatork Africa aurait dû se conclure par une grande exposition à Bozar en 2021. Donc le projet a commencé en 2017. Il se trouve qu'entre-temps s'est immiscée la pandémie mondiale qui fait que ce projet s'est finalement transformé en exposition virtuelle à travers une plateforme numérique pour laquelle je vous donnerai les liens à la fin de la présentation. Donc une exposition avec 5 thématiques qui sont représentées dans 5 salles différentes. Je vous propose de parcourir chacune de ces salles de manière très synthétique et nous allons voir un des projets par salle pour pouvoir chaque fois capter et la thématique et une des propositions artistiques que nous font les bénéficiaires. Donc la salle 1, ça consiste à renforcer les capacités des artistes et des acteurs culturels déjà existants. Donc, c'est un des axes de Culturatork Africa, donc pour la cohésion sociale et le changement transformateur. Nous avons retenu pour cette thématique-là un projet qui s'appelle Photographie et culture visuelle pour une citoyenneté active. Ça se passe en Ouganda, à Kampala, et les acteurs de ce projet sont des étudiants en journalisme. Alors, ils vont faire ça de manière extrascolaire, donc pas directement dans le cadre de leurs études, et ils seront formés au photojournalisme et au photoreportage, notamment avec un outil qui est le smartphone. Donc, à travers de ce smartphone, ils vont capturer, transcrire et documenter les réalités de leur environnement direct. Ils vont faire ça à travers aussi aborder des sujets comme la politique, par exemple, à travers les archives, donc l'activation d'archives, et toute une autre série de thématiques comme le sexe, l'orientation sexuelle, le genre, la démocratie locale, mais également toute une série d'autres thématiques qu'on va pouvoir voir à travers une exposition qu'ils auront faite. C'est une exposition qui en elle-même était une expérience, puisque en soi, il fallait réunir les différents acteurs et réunir les travaux de ces différents acteurs, et puis créer physiquement, monter une exposition physique. Donc ça aussi, pour eux, ça a été une expérience extrêmement formatrice, et d'ailleurs, certains d'entre eux, à l'occasion de cette initiative, ont pu avoir des opportunités professionnelles. Je vous propose de regarder certaines de leurs photos. Donc, une des thématiques qui sera abordée est la thématique de la pandémie, bien sûr, avec le lockdown, donc ce fameux confinement. Et donc, on a ici un des photographes qui explique que il a photographié un monsieur qui, à cause du confinement, ne pouvait plus se rendre sur son lieu de travail, mais que par contre, ça lui a permis de profiter de sa famille et notamment de sa toute petite fille qui venait de naître. Ici, nous avons donc un jeune qui essaye de s'occuper pour échapper à l'oppression de ce confinement. Et là, nous avons un jeune qui a fabriqué aussi un instrument qui probablement est censé s'envoler. Donc, c'est une manière aussi de s'évader du confinement. Une des thématiques, je vous disais, c'est aussi la démocratie, donc la critique des archives politiques, donc des photographies d'affiches publicitaires, d'affiches électorales notamment, hein, comme ici, les politician eyes, donc qu'est-ce qu'il y a derrière les yeux de ces hommes politiques, est-ce qu'ils disent toujours la vérité? Une référence aussi au président Obote qui était à la tête du PPK, et puis qui a été un des premiers présidents d'Ouganda, et on sait aussi que c'était surtout un dictateur, donc toute une critique aussi au niveau des photos, et une construction qui représente en fait une déconstruction de son discours. Il y a eu également des élections qui ont eu lieu pendant cette pandémie. Alors comment est-ce qu'on fait campagne pendant une pandémie? On voit ici que le monsieur se rend auprès des populations, mais qu'il a son masque en main, donc c'est quelque chose que nous connaissons bien pour le moment. Et puis aussi ce côté inclusif, donc de créer des sociétés inclusives et de rendre visibles des communautés qui sont en général discriminées quand elles ne sont pas carrément maltraitées. Donc on a le cas des communautés LGBT, mais aussi les femmes, les travailleuses du sexe notamment, donc une série de communautés qui sont régulièrement discriminées. Le projet en lui-même a évidemment pris un certain temps et je vous propose d'écouter les acteurs de ce travail qui expliquent quelle a été leur expérience et comment ils sont ressortis grandis du processus de création. Nous avons Stella Natonga, qui est une des coordinatrices de ce projet, qui est présente sur le panel et que vous pourrez interroger par la suite. Alors, je vais vous faire passer la vidéo.
My name is Cairo Philip Peter. One thing that I've really picked out from the workshop was the aspect of using the medium or the equipment that I have, the mobile phone, to come up with a story.
It has been an interesting time working with Edward Echalu and learning how to use a mobile phone to capture stories in our communities.
And this workshop comes at the right time when I'm documenting Honorable Kyagulanyi Ssentamu, from a pop star to Member of Parliament, now aspiring to be President of Uganda.
We see the ideas come to life from developing the story to actual execution to editing and finally exhibiting it amongst each other. So I think it was a very fulfilling 2 weeks.
Voilà, donc première salle, première thématique et un des projets qui a été retenu. Passons à la salle 2. Donc en salle 2, c'est surtout le thème de la liberté d'expression dans le cadre du dialogue interculturel. Et le deuxième axe qui est ici de créer des espaces culturels, la synergie entre ces espaces culturels et des espaces évidemment sûrs, sécurisés et neutres pour que puisse s'exprimer l'expression artistique et puis aussi la consolidation de la paix à travers cette expression artistique. Là, on a retenu un projet qui s'appelle African Space Makers, donc les créateurs d'espace, et ça a donné lieu au premier documentaire en 3D interactif réalisé en Afrique. Alors documentaire parce que c'est un faux documentaire, on va dire, mais auquel ont participé à peu près 37 artistes et 5 espaces créatifs locaux. Donc, on a un collectif d'artistes autofinancés d'ailleurs, un centre d'art, on a un collectif musical, on a également des artistes de graffiti, puisqu'on va parler de street art, et puis on a aussi des skaters. Alors, tous ces gens vont aborder dans le documentaire différentes thématiques, et notamment des thématiques qui ont pour but de repenser les modèles urbains actuels et surtout de questionner les normes sociales tout simplement. Ça a donné lieu évidemment à une affiche, l'affiche du film, et puis dans quelques secondes, je vais vous montrer le teaser, donc on va dire la bande-annonce. Alors, je vais juste signaler que ça a impliqué quand même aussi la municipalité de Nairobi, qui est directement partenaire de ce projet, et puis toute une série de professionnels locaux, comme des professionnels de la production, du marketing, mais aussi des costumiers, des costumières, donc une série d'emplois locaux qui ont pu être créés grâce à ça, et que les acteurs de ce travail ont également pu assister, ont été invités à des événements internationaux. Donc voilà, c'est aussi quelque chose qui a été très utile, en dehors simplement de la sphère strictement de leur communauté ou de leur ville. Je vous propose de regarder la bande-annonce qui est très dynamique et qui donc annonce le documentaire.
Nairobi, another fast-growing African city, usually known for worrying figures and apocalyptic scenarios on the urban future of our continent. What's real and what's imaginary in the world of African urban storytelling?
Where is the African way?
Meet your crew in a workshop. Explore the city like a real documentary film director in the search of people who are changing the urban landscape. Experience what does it mean to turn reality into something magical with magical people. Public transport turned into spoken poetry stages, artists living in the savannah suburbs, fashion designers challenging their establishment, graffiti artists running away from the data police, priests trying to fight for street art, creatives trying to recycle dumped human bodies into cyborg animals, skaters transforming private parkings into temporary amusement parks. And last but not least, the psychedelic effects of the Jabba Juice and the Zazi movement. Youths and smart drugs to survive in this urban jungle. African Space Makers, a journey into urban storytelling and magical realism.
And now, all the way from Nairobi, the way.
Wewe unafanya nini hapa?
Voilà, je vous invite vraiment à aller découvrir ce projet plus en profondeur et on va passer à la salle 3. La salle 3 dont la thématique est de pouvoir autonomiser les communautés, ces fameuses communautés qui sont discriminées ou invisibilisées. Donc on revient évidemment aux femmes souvent, les jeunes, et donc grâce à une action culturelle locale, forcer les autorités à réagir. Alors c'est un projet qui s'appelle, celui qu'on a retenu ici, c'est les femmes à travers la lentille au sens photographique du terme, hein, donc à travers l'objectif. Et le travail a consisté à former une dizaine de jeunes femmes issues de zones géographiques tout à fait différentes, de milieux sociaux différents, avec des expériences différentes, aussi au niveau photographique, quelques-unes pas du tout, d'autres un petit peu déjà, encadrées par 5 autres femmes qui, elles, sont des professionnelles. Donc, c'est une équipe interculturelle, mais internationale aussi. Donc, ces femmes ont, pendant 2 semaines, formé les 10 autres à la photographie, dans le domaine du photojournalisme, pour pouvoir créer finalement une exposition qu'elles vont présenter au Festival de la photo de Lagos en 2019. Alors, les professionnels de la photo qui ont travaillé avec ces 10 jeunes femmes, ce sont des professionnels de la photo au sens large, hein. C'est aussi bien des conteuses visuelles que des photographes d'art, que des journalistes. Mais donc voilà, au sens large, le travail à travers ce médium qu'est la photographie. Ce sont des femmes, c'est un regard de femmes sur toute une série de sujets. Alors évidemment avec une sensibilité particulière sur la cause d'autres femmes. Donc on a ici à différents moments. Ici on a une des photographes qui travaille sur la thématique de sa mère, donc le portrait de sa maman. Et c'est toute une série de photos. Hein. Donc là, c'en est une parmi la série qu'elle a utilisée dans la série Portrait of My Mother. De nouveau, l'inclusion des communautés discriminées. Ici, on a le thème des communautés LGBT. Et un petit reportage résumé aussi, de Vanessa Enderley, qui va interroger des prostituées, des travailleuses du sexe. Et les témoignages sont assez poignants. Donc, vous allez voir des témoignages de 3 femmes qui expliquent comment elles sont systématiquement arrêtées, violées parce qu'elles doivent payer de leur corps pour pouvoir être libérées, et comment la police était extrêmement brutale envers elles. Et puis à la fin, on a un moment où elles font une manifestation où elles disent que la police est censée les protéger et pas les menacer, que parmi les policiers, il y a aussi des femmes, des policières, et que ce qui leur arrive aujourd'hui en termes de violence policière pourrait très bien arriver à n'importe laquelle d'entre les autres une fois d'après. Donc je vous propose de regarder ce reportage, et puis ensuite nous passerons à la suite.
I wonder why our vaginas are endangered on behalf of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
In Maraba, when they arrest me for late hours, then we are like 5. Then they took us to station. Then some of them they come through back saying that they want to have sex with us. Then like when me and one girl will say no, we will not have sex with them, but the other girls have sex with them before they release them. But me and the girl will pay before they leave us in Maraba station.
Those police people, when they arrest you, mainly say when they like you, that's where they will come to molest you. So that maybe if you don't have money to give them, you give them yourself, your body. But if you don't accept, they will now go and dump you in the cell. Are you getting me? And then they will now say you have to pay yourself so amount, or you remain there.
One time for inside town, they arrest us. The police say they go fuck me before they go leave me. I say me I no agree. Make them carry me go to the station. And they say no, my bro waiting in my hand. Now I'm going to give them now 1,000 naira in my hand that day. I'm going to give them. You can see me with one man. He said no one see me.
Protect us! Don't rape us, protect us! Stop police raid on women! Police raid on women! Stop police raid on women! Police raid on women! And today we need tomorrow! They don't arrest us, Naya! Hey! They don't arrest us, Naya! Hey! They don't arrest us, Naya! How many women police go arrest?
Voilà, je voulais signaler aussi que dans le cadre de ce projet, les jeunes femmes qui ont participé à ça ont aussi été encouragées à créer une entreprise, donc à avoir non seulement un projet artistique, mais également un projet d'autonomie économique, et donc vraiment très encouragées à l'entrepreneuriat. La salle 4, qui est l'avant-dernière salle, elle vise à promouvoir le dialogue institutionnel, en fait à créer des institutions fortes et solides. Et puis, ces institutions sont censées pouvoir favoriser les échanges transfrontaliers, mais aussi renforcer les plaidoyers pour ce fameux avenir culturel durable. Et là, le projet qui a été retenu, c'est un projet qui consiste à élaborer des lieux, des plateformes spontanées, mais des lieux sûrs, de confiance, inclusifs aussi, pour que la création artistique puisse s'exprimer à différents niveaux, hein, que ce soit le théâtre, le cinéma, la musique, la danse. Et donc, Ça se passe au Nigeria, à Port Harcourt. Alors, Port Harcourt, c'est un quartier qui est un quartier totalement informel, qui est en bordure de la ville, hein, donc vraiment en bordure de mer. Et c'est un bidonville. C'est un bidonville surpeuplé avec plus de 480 000 personnes qui vivent là et qui, en réalité, n'existent pas réellement, officiellement, sur la carte. D'ailleurs, dans le projet plus loin, vous pourrez voir aussi qu'ils ont créé une carte, un mapping, avec un plan de la ville. Et donc, à un moment donné, ils vont se mettre sur ce plan pour montrer qu'ils existent, qu'il y a des êtres humains qui vivent là et qu'ils ne sont pas juste inexistants. Donc, ils vont aussi réaliser une plateforme interactive numérique, hein, avec une radio aussi qui s'appelle Chikoko Radio, et puis ils vont avoir l'occasion aussi de construire réellement un lieu de rassemblement, un lieu de réunion, un lieu où ils vont pouvoir faire des performances artistiques. Et c'est un bâtiment qu'ils ont construit et où ils ont été aidés par un architecte de renommée internationale qui s'appelle Alejandro Hayek, qui est vénézuélien et qui a donc aussi contribué à créer cet endroit. Je vous propose quelques photos, puisqu'ils ont, bien sûr, dans les différentes expressions artistiques, ils utilisent également la photo. Et ici, nous avons la thématique notamment de l'accès à l'eau potable. Donc, bidonville en bord de mer, mais un bidonville par essence même, ce sont des constructions faites de briques et de broc. Et donc, il n'y a pas vraiment d'eau courante qui arrive. Et comment est-ce qu'on peut accéder à l'eau potable? Eh bien, en allant acheter des sachets d'eau, des petits sachets d'eau, et dans le projet, ils expliqueront que même ces sachets d'eau posent un problème sanitaire, puisque notamment pendant la saison humide, ces sachets sont quelquefois eux-mêmes contaminés. Ici, on voit l'accès au puits, donc ils sont obligés aussi d'aller chercher de l'eau au puits. Les photos sont magnifiques, hein, éclairage de nuit. Donc c'est Isaac Harry qui, avec le Chikoko Collective, a fait cette série de photos. Le même Isaac Harry va aussi aborder le problème de l'accès à l'électricité. Évidemment, on est dans le même cas que pour l'eau, pas d'accès à l'électricité ou que quelques heures le soir. Et comment on fait pour continuer à pratiquer la culture si on n'a pas d'électricité ou très peu? Eh bien, on se débrouille et voilà, on va le faire avec des lampes pétrole. Dans le projet, il raconte aussi qu'à certains moments, on va carrément se mettre au-dessus de la lueur d'une petite flamme qui sert à fumer le poisson. Et donc, ils expliquent du coup que ça pique les yeux, qu'on sent le poisson après. Mais voilà, toutes ces façons de se débrouiller pour pouvoir pallier au manque d'accès à l'électricité. Voilà, de nouveau une photo d'une jeune femme qui lit dans le noir. Et je vous propose de regarder une vidéo de leur collectif Chikoko, et où ils s'expriment de différentes manières.
My heart's a radio, it only beats for the truth. We want a station that can speak out for the youths, where our stories make the news. Where we have options, we would choose to watch facts instead of fiction. Reality is no sci-fi, no green screen picture. It's our story, what do we need a script for? Don't try to sugarcoat the bitterness of being poor.
Radio cinema, maps and Susan, Chikoko Collective.
When we have the space, we'll do it big. For now, we'll do it small. Great opportunity to break the wall of setback, oppression, and forced eviction. In the slum, create a space for our dreams and vision. Put ourselves in the map, be a part of the city. People live here, we want to live free.
Yeah.
We want to live free.
Chikoko, radio cinema, maps and Susan, Chikoko Collective.
You know, nothing is a waste if it can't be managed. The higher the carbon, more risks to the climate. Clean up our world, one plastic at a time. Chikoko music to the world, our story in a song. Where we got the space, we do it big, now let's do it small. people live here and we want to be free.
Radio cinema. Map and society. Chico Collective.
We are Chico Collective, supported by CIMA.
Voilà, et la dernière salle, qui est la salle numéro 5, c'est une salle qui aborde la question du patrimoine physique, donc le patrimoine architectural, territoire et espace, et qui, à travers l'histoire de ces bâtiments, va permettre de créer des communautés inclusives et ce sentiment d'appartenance, puisque ces bâtiments sont la preuve et les témoins de l'histoire des communautés, des villes, et des gens qui habitent sur place. Alors, ça va se faire dans un cinéma, un ancien cinéma qui s'appelle le Majestic Cinéma et qui va être transformé en centre commercial. Donc, c'est en cours de réalisation. Et ce cinéma a déjà eu l'occasion d'avoir des événements culturels. On a ici quelques photos du cinéma en 1920, donc les années 20, au moment où il a été construit, donc avec toute l'histoire coloniale aussi autour de ça. En 1954, il va brûler, et puis il sera reconstruit en 1956. Et puis ici, nous avons la version actuelle qui est à peu près la même que celle de 1956. L'intérieur du cinéma aujourd'hui et les projets de rénovation, d'aménagement, avec l'aide d'étudiants en architecture de différentes universités. Donc, vous parlez aussi de liens transfrontaliers. Donc, on a ici l'Afrique du Sud, Cape Town, l'Ouganda, et donc différents jeunes étudiants en architecture qui font des propositions pour réaménager cet espace et ce lieu culturel. Je vous disais qu'il y avait donc déjà des événements qui avaient lieu. On a eu dernièrement un événement qui a présenté le projet de transformation. Donc, je vous montrerai dans quelques secondes la vidéo qui reprend cet événement, auquel ont assisté donc Madame Fatma Allo, qui est la cofondatrice du Festival international du film de Zanzibar, la ministre du Tourisme et des Antiquités, donc Madame Leila Mohamed Moussa, et Massoum Salim, qui est le directeur de Hifadhi Zanzibar. Et Hifadhi Zanzibar est une société qui s'occupe de gestion de patrimoine et notamment de patrimoine architectural. Voilà, je vous laisse avec la petite vidéo où vous allez voir apparaître ces différentes personnalités et puis ça se termine par une performance artistique donc d'une dame qui chante.
Declare my full support for this initiative that is focused on our heritage site sustainability. We can't afford
Voilà, c'est la fin de ce petit parcours très synthétisé de l'exposition. Nous avons parcouru les 5 salles et je vous invite évidemment, puisque nous n'aurons vu que 5 projets, d'aller visiter les 27 autres à travers la plateforme numérique. Donc, chacun de ces projets, évidemment, vise un ou plusieurs objectifs de développement durable. Certains projets en visent carrément 3, 4. Et chacun des projets est à retrouver sur soit la publication physique, donc vraiment un livre où on peut retrouver tous les projets, le site online de l'exposition, le site de Bozar qui va également pouvoir vous renvoyer sur ce lien de l'exposition en ligne. Et puis, ils ont également une page Facebook que vous pouvez consulter. Donc, la conférence que nous avons aujourd'hui, elle est en fait la session finale d'une série de débats qui ont déjà eu lieu à Abidjan le 19 mai et puis le 8 juin à Paris. Et donc, nous sommes maintenant à Bruxelles. À Bruxelles, il y a la fameuse carte graphique qui est présente à Bozar même, donc dans les locaux de Bozar. Donc, vous pouvez aller soit sur la plateforme numérique, mais vous pouvez également venir à Bozar pour consulter cette carte numérique. Et vous voyez que sur la carte, nous avons des QR codes. Il y en a 15, chacun représentant un pays. Et en les scannant, vous pouvez rentrer dans chacun des pays et aller visiter les différents projets de chacun des pays. Si vous êtes en plus à Bozar le week-end du 9-11 juillet, eh bien, je vous invite à profiter des activités qu'il y a lors de l'Afropolitan Weekend. Donc toute une série d'activités qui ont dû être réduites à cause des conditions sanitaires, mais qui ont quand même lieu de manière réduite, mais bien présente. Alors, il ne me reste plus qu'à vous remercier et puis à vous souhaiter beaucoup de plaisir à visiter cette exposition, soit de manière virtuelle, soit un petit peu physique quand même, en venant nous rendre visite à Bozar. Merci.
Merci beaucoup Béatrice Siby pour cette présentation que je ne peux que définir que de magnifique.
Thank you very much for this brilliant presentation on what has been done over the last 4 years in our different projects, especially the project leaders who were able to carry out those ideas, demonstrating that culture is the fourth pillar of local development, especially in Africa, and how culture can be a driver for social, economic, and human and environmental development in our territories. We hope that with those vibrant projects, which have been so well showcased by this administration, many more will join. And hopefully, we welcome nowadays those tools which made it possible for us to reach a widespread audience. As partners of Culture at Work Africa, we are privileged to have been able to access such quality digital content, because we are well aware that it's far from being the case for a majority of the world's population, and particularly in Africa. So we'd like to take this opportunity to make a call so that on top of work on digital culture, we try and reduce the digital divide which separates many of us on the World Wide Web. On behalf of all the partners of Culture at Work Africa, it's my pleasure to introduce the following speaker.
Deputy Head of Unit Youth, Education, Culture at the Directorate General International Partnership of the European Commission. Annika, it's a real pleasure to give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Yes, hello, Valeria. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's really a great pleasure to be here today as you're closing the Culture at Work Africa project that you have implemented through a consortium of partners led by InterArts with almost 3 million euros of EU co-financing. So as we've seen in the exhibition that you just showed us, this project has been very ambitious and succeeded in its mission to support 34 local cultural projects in various African countries, and has in that way contributed to the implementation of the EU's approach to culture and sustainable development. So as you know, culture is firmly anchored in our sustainable development agenda, and which recognizes culture as a driver and enabler of sustainable development. And culture is also at the very heart of the European Union. You know, our motto is United in Diversity, which indicates the richness and variation of European cultures. And this is really the core of the European project, and to embrace and promote this diversity, the freedom of expression, including artistic expression, and human rights, also in our external relations, so not only in the EU. But above all, creativity and artistic expression is about empowering people, and particularly those that are not heard, youth, women, minorities, to give them a voice to express views, to challenge stereotypes, and to stand up for rights. So culture is also a very important contribution to the EU's geopolitical priorities, such as the Green Deal, by changing behaviors and mentalities, or to jobs and growth, and the digital agenda by ensuring opportunities for cultural workers, including those in the digital sphere. So this is the context in which the Culture at Work Africa project has contributed to this approach. So as you know, the EU policy on culture and international cooperation identifies 3 main areas of action. So firstly, we promote intercultural and interfaith dialogue to enhance cultural pluralism and mutual understanding, respect for diversity, equality, and human rights. And the project has greatly contributed to these objectives. For instance, through artistic and cultural performances with refugees, disabled people, and vulnerable groups in countries like Rwanda, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, just to name a few. Or by empowering young cultural actors to shape the public space in Kenya. Secondly, the EU supports cultural and creative sectors that offer opportunities for economic growth and job opportunities. This is the main work of ongoing projects like the ACP EU Culture Programme or innovative financing initiatives for culture in East Africa and Burkina Faso. But this project, the Culture at Work Africa, has also contributed to support the economic dimension of culture by providing cultural actors with financial and technical support, for instance, of young women photographers in Nigeria, or creating spaces for young creatives to show, share, and exchange about their practices and work in Côte d'Ivoire. Thirdly, and not lastly, we support cultural heritage cooperation that brings communities and people together. This really brings the sense of identity, and it's also a source of tourism. So this is why we have been protecting and promoting cultural heritage, in particular post-conflict and fragile situations in Yemen, Iraq, and Mali. And Culture at Work has also made a contribution, as cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible, is at the heart of cultural work supported through the grants. For instance, the cultural heritage was at the core of the projects working with oral traditions and storytelling to promote social change in Zimbabwe and Benin. Culture is also a cornerstone of the partnership between EU and Africa. And the Culture at Work Africa is a great example of how cultural cooperation between European and African people and organizations can support sustainable development outcomes. So the project is a joint initiative of African and European organizations that have empowered cultural actors to be actors of change. Culture at Work has supported cross-border cultural cooperation between and across Anglophone and Francophone Africa. And through its action, the project has actually also supported two priorities of the 2063 Vision Agenda by the African Union. The first one being cultural values and African Renaissance, and the second being cultural heritage, creative art, and businesses. Culture is part of our 2020 strategy for Africa, which recognizes the importance of cultural rights and cultural sectors as a factor of economic growth and social cohesion, and cooperation with cultural actors is promoted. We also have a renewed EU agreement with the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States that has reinforced the cultural cooperation dimension. And our program, the ACP EU Culture, is a testimony of this commitment to culture. And some of the partners that are involved in the Culture at Work Africa project are actually also taking part in the implementation of that cooperation. As your program draws to a close, cooperation with some of the consortium members continues, of course, in other formats. I would just like to end this intervention by drawing the attention to three issues that are increasingly important to us to promote social cohesion through culture in Africa, Europe, and everywhere else for that matter. Firstly, social cohesion is linked to inclusion and tolerance of different groups. So this means that also ensuring an equal access to culture to different groups and populations. And we've seen that this is growing in importance with the trend towards digital consumption of culture. This is what we've seen in the past year due to the various measures to fight COVID-19. There are still big divides in terms of access to digital technology, digital literacy for women, rural populations, among others. Secondly, the measures taken to fight the pandemic have shown the resilience and relevance of culture. It can actually be a lifeline for people, but it has also demonstrated how vulnerable the situation is for cultural workers. So this is an issue that needs to be addressed to have a more inclusive and cultural creative sectors, those that are more disadvantaged, including young people that are just starting careers, women that need to balance family and professional life. They are even more vulnerable to this precariousness, and this is something that we need to pay attention to. Lastly, and this explains why it's so important to have creative ecosystems that they need to be fostered. If cultural and creative sectors want to be drivers of sustainable development, funding, training is important, but also supporting advocacy to drive policy reforms, informing policy discussions with evidence, data, and proof of impact. So I will end myself here, but I would really like to express once more our appreciation for the excellent work done by the team implementing Culture at Work in Africa. And we are really looking forward to hear the perspectives of the panelists in the next session. So thanks a lot for your attention.
Valeria, you are mute.
Thank
Thank you, Annick.
Thank you very much. So sorry for the audience. There was a mismatch in unmuting my micro. So I was thanking very much Annika, Floren, for the European Commission for the ongoing support of the European Commission's to culture as a driver and enabler of sustainable development, as we believe that sustainable development can't be achieved if we don't put human at the center of it, so people. And what are we, men and women, if we are not made of our own cultural belief, expression, and values, that by time to time also divide us. So we should also work into the directions that the Commission invited to work through in the call we replied as a consortium towards intercultural dialogue and the promotion of cultural diversity in a spirit of progress. I would now like to give the floor to Pedro Alfonso Ivo Franco, who is a consultant in cultural and creative industries and participated in the report Cultural and Creative Industries Supporting Activities in the Sub-Saharan Africa, also for the European Commission. Pedro, I would like to give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Valeria. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today and sharing and learning from and with you. I would like, in the name of Bozar and InterArts, to extend my gratitude to the other consortium members and to say that it was really great to see the exhibitions, the exposition of the projects before, so that we could feel a bit closer, even more closer with those who were really developing things and taking advantage in a very positive way of this project existence. So I would like to share my screen, and I would really appreciate if you could just confirm that you are able to see my screen. Is that okay with everybody?
Yes.
So yeah, I am the co-author, along with Professor Kimani Nijogo from Nairobi, Kenya, of the study Cultural and Creative Industries Supporting Activities in Sub-Saharan Africa. This report was commissioned by the Institut für Auslandsbeziehungen. It's a German organization attached to the German Foreign Office back in 2019. We had the official launch of this report last year, but we believe that the research is and will keep being a lively instrument for reflection and change. So today I will bring the findings and also to frame this research, connecting it with the cultural at work. We had a very, very interesting task when the research started. It was to identify the supporting programs that were funded or implemented by the European Union, by European Union member states, and at that time, the UK was still a member state, as well as non-EU states' cultural institutions. The second objective was to determine why and how cultural and creative industries programs were funded, and through that be able to identify the sectors which mainly received funding and if there were thematic overlaps, as well as to discuss the policy context in which these activities in Sub-Saharan Africa were undertaking. So we also analyzed the regional policy framework, and naturally to give policy recommendations for future interventions. The first challenge we usually have whenever we do research in the cultural and creative sector, it's which classification are we going to adopt? And as we covered a whole region, we decided to capture it through the UNCTAD Creative Economy Report classification, but also respecting the various countries' classifications, the local countries. The second criteria was to focus on programs that were either funded or implemented across the whole Sub-Saharan region, or even connecting the Sub-Saharan region with other regions around the world, which is the case of the ASP culture, for instance, as well as intra-regional programs that connect East Africa with West Africa, South Africa with Central Africa, and vice versa. The time frame we used was the last 5 years, backing from 2020. And in terms of impact, remembering that we didn't evaluate these programs. We used already the evaluations. We are also collected data through conducting interviews with the so-called beneficiaries. We also had 2 workshop rounds, one in Nairobi in Kenya, in which we invited the sub-Saharan Africa key players, including the artists, entrepreneurs, cultural institutions. And we did the same here in Berlin in 2020, so that we could somehow make a bridge between the findings we had and the opinion, the ideas, and the views of those who were considered as key players. Some of the key figures we came across, we analyzed in terms of initiatives, 24 initiatives being divided into 18 programs and 6 projects. We analyzed an overall of programs that were supporting 32 different countries from a diversity of 30 different founders or implementers. And in terms of sectors, we came across all the sectors being supported. More precisely in our findings, in relation to our findings, the first point was this diversity of actors and programs. We have realized that there is a huge somehow connection and disconnection at the same time of the actors. For instance, it can be that 2 actors from the same country are doing the same kind of initiative. We'll give you an example: Institut Français, Alliance Française, Agence Française de Développement, that can be dealing with the sector either in a very organized manner, in a connected manner, or independently. We know that there is always the situation that organizations are looking for fundings to be able to implement or to sub-grant programs, and there is naturally a competition, but also a collaboration. Here we come to the diversity of countries and how these countries and regions are reached. We came across the fact that there are different hubs and influence zones, mainly due to the colonial past and linguistic connection. So we know that there is the Francophonic community, the English-speaking countries, and as well as the Portuguese-speaking countries. The main countries that were supported in our findings were Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, Senegal, Ethiopia, and RDC to a lesser extent. We also found out that in the region of Central Africa, there is a lack of cross-border support program, for instance, connecting the Congos with Angola and so on, or Central African Republic. The other interesting thing that we came across was that the number of local institutions, local European institutions, European institutions working on the ground, which in some cases are already considered as local, given the fact they are present for a long time, really matters in a way that trust is built, right? So we have found through interviews with the beneficiaries that they tend to trust much more in the organizations in which they have a previous references, a previous contact with an institution that it's decentralized and has arms on the ground. Coming to the diversity of sectors, we have found that there are basically all the sectors being covered. So I'm not going to repeat all of them. I will prefer to cover where there is room for improvement. For instance, there is a huge overlap on programs supporting film, music, performing arts, and fashion. The technological aspect has been increasing within these last 5 years. We have compared year by year programs that included technological elements either as the main focus or as components of the programs. The other thing is that there is a step-by-step increase in interest in supporting programs which take into account the green aspect within the sustainable development perspective, and this is mainly done through programs in relation to fashion, design, and festival. So through these three sectors, programs, they are touching more and more the green perspective within the sustainable development framework connected to the cultural sector. Here we usually say there is a supermarket of intervention in which programs go there, they pick up things that they want to do, that they consider interesting and important to do, and these interventions are either done sectors oriented, focused, let's say in the music sector or the festival sector, or these are more general interventions through areas, for instance, LGBT plus or women inclusion, young youth, and tackling young people problems and all these kind of interventions, but they are mostly related to the SDGs goals, which is a very good signal. Coming here to the last points and already building the bridge with culture at work. The recommendations we designed were based on five different points. The first point was the need to move towards building more bottom-up programs. We have realized and perceived very clearly that most of the programs we analyzed were designed here in Europe, and they were implemented in sub-Saharan Africa. So to take into account the local needs and to make the locals and the potential beneficiaries to influence the design of the program, it's something that it's still to be explored, still to be done. The other point was in relation to diversification of funding. We found out that there were a few programs acknowledging the importance of intellectual property to be resisted whenever innovation emerge in the continent. We know there is a huge difficulty in terms of policy and the accomplishment of intellectual property rights in the region, in sub-Saharan Africa. And we realized that these programs could also try to tackle this issue a bit more directly, as well as the issue of content distribution. We see that in many occasions, programs are focused on entrepreneurship, in fostering production, but we ask production to whom? Who is consuming this production? Is there a real market consuming this production, either in sub-Saharan Africa or even here in Europe? And how the intellectual rights, the intellectual property are preserved whenever this production goes to the market. The third point, it's about mapping previous initiatives, because we saw that some occasion programs were implemented talking about including one sector, bringing a narrative, talking with the same language of a previous program that were already developed in that same country with that same people, basically, because in many occasions there is a repetition of beneficiaries. So we realized that there is an opportunity to build programs as a ladder, programs that will build on the legacy of what the previous program left in order to advance things and to be able to give continuity instead of repeating too much. Again, the diversity of sector, more room for green elements, either as the main focus or components of sectors, and the utilization of the local policy context. We see that there is an orientation in terms of SDGs, in terms of what the EU recommends in terms of external cultural relations, but there is a lack of activities and narrative language connecting these programs with the language of local organizations, local frameworks. So for instance, recommendations from the African Union on multilingualism or cultural frameworks are still as well to be developed. Now connecting it with the cultural at work, and I don't want to play the role of the best friend here, but I believe whenever something good takes place, we need to share up this thing, and we need to use it as a source of inspirations for new programs. We saw that many of our recommendations are connected with what the culture at work has been developing. So for instance, the consortium take into account the local organizations, making them to be experienced, to learn, to have a say, and to teach as well the European organizations. It's something that we saw very positively. The other fact was that the program takes into account the African Union vision for an integrated, prosperous and peaceful Africa, very directly at the core center of the narrative. And the other thing, we saw that we need to break a bit more the silos. What I mean by that, to stop working, I think, focus only in one country whenever we have the possibility to be more inclusive and to bring other countries together, to make them dialogue, to make them to be connected with each other. So the possibility this program gave to open up spaces, safe spaces for conversations, for expressions, was also very welcome. And also the last thing, before I close here, it's the fact that the program was widely distributed in 15 countries coming from these different regions, making these creators, civil society groups, to be connected and exchanging, learning from each other. The last thing I wanted to say, this research was published before, was basically finished before the pandemics. We had the launch during the pandemics. However, we didn't include much information about the situation currently. And if there are two other extra things we would like to recommend and to raise awareness are the importance of vaccine for the region. We can talk about the cultural sector, reopening the cultural sector, if there is no enough vaccine around sub-Saharan Africa, and this goes also to the rest of the developing world, and the support to digitalization. I personally work with Africa basically on a daily basis. There are people here who work from Africa and within Africa on a daily basis, and the internet, the lack of digital connectivity, given the fact the internet costs is still high in various countries, and it's not easy to be accessed. We see it also as somehow a kind of violence preventing people from connecting. So these would be the two main issues that were perceived strongly after the beginning of the pandemic. So with that, I stop my intervention and I give the word back to Valérie, and I'm happy to take questions as well later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pedro. And I would like to invite you to remain around the virtual roundtable as we talk about going digital. Also because we are gender unbalanced. So for once, it may be in our favor. Joking aside, but it was a nice way to introduce my marvelous other colleagues around the table that I will invite one by one to join. I'm Valeria Marcolin from Culture et Développement, one of the partners of the consortium. And I was tasked with the moderation of the panel discussion that will bring together Lisa Sidame. She's project coordinator for Rethinking Communities through Culture, Nimbe Trust. Lisa cooperates with many other projects of Nimbe Trust. She has also responsibilities and expertise on the African Union Pan-African Cultural Congress. She attended as civil society participant. She's a scholar for many institutions. She will be also accompanied in the panel from a second representative of the Sagrantees from Cultural Network Africa, Stella Nantonga, who will represent the project Photography and Visual Literacy for Active Citizenship from Uganda Press Photo Award, Uganda. Those two colleagues, Lisa and Stella, will therefore represent the more larger communities of sub-grantees. Unfortunately, as we are online, not all of them will be able to participate, although they would have liked to. So you have the responsibility to represent also all your colleagues, and I know they can count on you. I would then like to give the floor to Vincenza Schule. Vincenza is Senior Cultural Officer of Cultural Division, Department of Social Affairs of the African Union Commission. It was very important, of course, in the framework of Cultural Network Africa to engage dialogue with institutions and in particular regional institutions and for the African Union. And last but not least, as we say, Gitte Tsoch, Unique Director and Designated General Secretary of IFA, Institute for Cultural Relations in Stuttgart, that was also involved as institute in the study that Pedro just introduced and presented. And I would then give again the floor to Pedro and Rai to wrap up the discussion with some food for thoughts for the conclusion that will follow after our panel. Without no further delay, I would like to give the floor to Lisa, if you are willing to break the ice.
Yeah, sure, happy to. Thank you, Valeria. Let me just quickly try to share my screen. All right, I'm having some technical challenges, but anyway, I'll start. I think I would like to just start by saying thank you to your team, Valeria, for organizing this very important dialogue as we start to reflect on the progress that has been realized in promoting intercultural dialogue on the continent. Okay, so I just want to quickly state that in my presentation, I am mostly going to focus on intercultural dialogue within the prism of post-conflict reconstruction and transitional justice, and with particular reference to ethnic polarity and ethnic fragmentation. And I think this is an issue that is of particular relevance to the African continent, especially looking at the number of conflicts in history that have emerged as a result of a collapse in ethnic relations. And we have seen reference to this conflicts being made over and over again within regional bodies, and we have seen it being also a priority to international bodies to try and see how post-conflict reconstruction can occur in a manner that promotes and drives social cohesion. So that is what I am going to be focusing on, and particularly how important our work is as cultural professionals who are working in that field. All right, so with that said, I am going to do three things in my presentation this afternoon. The first thing I'm going to do is present what I call questions of interrogation within the scope of the context that I'm going to be looking at. And then the second thing that I'm going to do is to present the Relinking Communities Through Culture project, which I coordinated as a prototype of the issues that I will seek to address. And then the third thing that I'm going to look at is how we look forward. And there are two concepts that I would particularly want to introduce, what I call intercultural dialogue preparedness and what I call intercultural dialogue readiness. Because I think most times we move into projects that look at intercultural dialogue without necessarily looking at our state of preparedness or readiness as we start with that. So to my first point, which is questions of interrogation. So I want to look at where social cohesion starts, because I think that's one of the key answers that that's one of the key questions, that we need to respond to as cultural professionals working in this field of intercultural dialogue. And also the second question being, when does intercultural dialogue occur? At what stage can we say we are ready to have intercultural dialogue? And then is there something as well that needs to happen first for intercultural dialogue to occur? And that is what I call preconditions. And then are there any indicators of readiness? And as we look at the role of artists and cultural professionals in driving dialogue on social cohesion, and also being aware of their role in that regard, what is the function of public and cultural spaces in driving that process? So that's what just my points of provocation, and I hope at some point you can also contribute to this presentation. And now moving on to the prototype that I spoke about, which is the Relinking Communities Through Culture project. So just to give a quick overview of what we sought to do with the Relinking Communities Through Culture projects, we brought, it benefited 378 artists, cultural professionals, and media practitioners in total. And what we sought to do was to enhance the capacities of these target groups for social cohesion within an urban context. We sought to raise awareness of the important role that they have in being drivers of change and in being transmitters of knowledge regarding where we stand as a country in Zimbabwe with regards to transitional justice. And that was within the backdrop of trying to address conflict narratives that have been inherited across generations. That was within the frame of also addressing narratives of historical injustices that have also been transmitted across generations. And that was also a way of addressing individual psychologists that have a bias towards prejudice, stereotypes, and intolerance. That is what we sought to do. And there are just a few things that I would like to highlight with regards to what the target participants themselves said. What we did was to create what we call a 100 Voices campaign. So it was just a dialogue series, because our participants were dealing with issues of post-conflict injustice. They were dealing with issues of historical injustices in a manner that they'd never done before. They wanted to speak on conditions of anonymity. And then when we came to the COVID environment, then what we realized was that in as much as we had embraced digital platforms, there's issues, sometimes issues of intercultural dialogue that deal with past injustices cannot occur within a digital space. So we needed to just wait for a bit until after lockdown to then bring everyone together for a conversation. So this is what one of the participants in the dialogue highlighted. So this particular person said, certain spaces give us permission to air our anger and frustration. So there is a stadium in the city of Bulawayo that's called Babafield Stadium. So this person said, BF Stadium is our space in Bulawayo. It represents freedom of speech. During football matches, we collectively compose songs that glorify our tribe. We can freely mock other tribes as well without censorship. So now this particular person was bringing out the aspect of space spaces of freedom of expression and how people artistically express themselves and what spaces they choose if they feel that they can't openly speak about things that they want to speak about as a result of probably repressive legislation, as a result of the level of intolerance that they get from other people. Then I'll move on now to the second quote that came from one of the participants. I can move on to the next slide. So this one addressed issues of who has the right to speak. So this particular person said, certain injustices that have been experienced in the past are associated with specific groups of people. So there was an occurrence in Zimbabwe that was called Gukurawundi that took an ethnic character and was also perceived as such. So this person said about that particular injustice. Gukurawundi, for example, is regarded as a Ndebele issue. As an artist who speaks Shona and stays in Harare, I've always felt that I can't use my art to address this issue because of the fear of being seen as getting into a space that doesn't belong to me. So I think I speak for a lot of my colleagues when I say, when as cultural operators, we get into a space of driving intercultural dialogue with regards to issues of past injustices, we are constantly faced with this question of who has the right to speak and about what particular issue. And then now moving on to the next one, which is the weight of a label. So this particular person said, it is difficult for me to use my platform to talk about sensitive issues such as identity politics. My fear is that I will be branded as an activist and not an artist. Activism has serious consequences. So then this brings to the fore this issue of, even if you are to speak, what are the consequences of being able to speak out as an artist, as a cultural professional, or even as a media practitioner? And this particular person reminded me of an experience that I had in Rwanda not too long ago, when one visual artist said, for him, when he's addressing issues of past injustices, he just wants to use his paintings because they are the ones that are supposed to speak for him, because the moment that he speaks, then he's regarded as a politician, he's regarded as an activist, and the kind of reception that he then gets as a result of that attracts consequences for him. So that is one of the things that I also wanted to highlight within the frame of the role of culture and artistic practices within the context of transitional justice and post-conflict reconstruction. And then I'm going to move on to another point, which is an issue of competing interests. So this particular person said, economic motivations play a role in incentivizing media practitioners to take up a role as propagandists. I'm a journalist and I've been reduced to spreading propaganda. I am aware of how harmful the information I disseminate is, but I have to survive. So there's a competing interest that we see people as transmitters of information on intercultural dialogue, but at the same time, they operate within a space of economic deprivation. And now moving on to my last point, which, as I said in the beginning, speaks to issues of readiness and preparedness. So what does that process look like? Because looking at that, looking at relinking communities through culture as a prototype, and having engaged many of my colleagues who were who were beneficiaries in the CAWA projects, we had to tackle this process. So we're even ready to have to drive intercultural dialogue. And then I came up with these 4 points that I would like to highlight. So the first one, I think, as we move forward, is to look at the responsibility to inform. So I would like to argue that the state must have the responsibility to inform people about past injustices, and then people also have the right to access information about past injustices. So this information needs to be accurate and historically factual. And then as cultural professionals, as civil society organizations, we have the right to correct and counter misinformation. And then we also need to drive artistic freedom, and especially within the backdrop where where we have this era of cancel culture, repressive legislation, self-censorship, etc. And then now, finally, as I close, I'm reminded of what one thought leader in the United States said when he was referring to the case of George Floyd and the process of the trial. He said the reason why people were able to create a third space where they could engage was because they were all presented with the same information about injustice, people could communicate across the racial divide and have that important dialogue on historical injustices that have a bias towards race because of that important factor being presented with the same information. So I think as we go forward and this highlight the responsibility of the state to inform, I think for us as cultural professionals, we appeal to institutions such as the AU, such as SADC, such as ECOWAS, EU, etc., to really look into this issue of intercultural dialogue, preparedness, and readiness, because we need people to be presented with the same information. And we also need to move to a point where we are honest about where intercultural dialogue starts and what the challenges are. So with that, thank you. And I'll be happy to take any questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I will go a little bit slower because I'm worried about our very dear translator that we really thank for their artwork that they are for sure doing beyond the scene, but it's a very well known that it's thanks to you that we can bring together community from different language environment, at least two. If we couldn't do more. And this brings us back to one of the challenges that Pedro raised and that we tried to tackle based on our field experience through Culture at Work Africa, as you very rightfully pointed out in your keynote speech. One of our concerns was indeed that if the call of the Commission at the time in 2017 was about promoting intercultural dialogue and cultural diversity in urban Africa, there were some preconditions that we would need to consider. First of all, cultural diversity and intercultural dialogue are grassroots, proximity issue, community-based issue, that Africa is a huge continent and therefore we should tackle this challenge. Therefore, the idea of being broad and bring together as far as possible some divide that we experience through our field work of many organizations that are brought together by the Consortium of Culture at Work Africa, but also their associates, which is the language divide, which is not different also from the European one. And here we see some common threats, common challenges that bring together the European and the African continent. I would now like to give the floor to Stella Natongo. Stella Natongo, as I told before, is the program coordinator at the Uganda Press Photo Award. Stella, I would like to give you the floor. As for me, I think, Stella, you are muted.
Sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Stella Natongo. I'm just trying to confirm that my audio is fine. Valeria?
Now it's fine. Thank you very
much. So my name is Stella. I'm the program coordinator for the Uganda Press Photo Award. Sorry, let me just move to the presentation. So it's a good thing that Lisa actually mentioned responsibility of information, because that is actually the basis of our project, Photography and Visual Literacy for Active Citizenship. The basic premise was essentially, hold on. Okay. So photography is a tool for storytelling and a tool for documenting and providing evidence for our communication for our ongoing histories. As I say, ongoing, because memory and time are fleeting, and photographs are an easy way to complement and fill in the gaps to give a bigger picture of what our ongoing environments are and communities. So basically, as we were considering, because of our education background, and we do a lot of education programming in our project as Uganda Press Photo Award, we thought about coming up with a platform where we could start with younger generational photojournalists and photographers and future photographers, and try to instill in them a culture of actually being mindful of how they represent photography and use the medium to actually document everything that's happening around them, since everyone now has a smartphone. So as I put in the presentation here, photography as a medium can help us relive moments and can essentially transfer us to a time gone. And it is tangible presentation of what is, what was, the different facets that build on our identities and who we are. It is evidence. But photography isn't immune to tampering. We have seen it. The many ways pictures can be manipulated to distort and change the narrative for whomever it suits best. Which is why we think it's imperative that we groom people who are visually literate and understand the power and the responsibility the photograph can hold. So the basic premise for photography and visual literacy for active citizenship was to introduce both of our students to history of photography in Africa and how photography was used in the past, so that they can understand the power and how it was used to subjugate us and misrepresent us and who we are, and still continues to be used to misrepresent us. So I wanted to also develop critical thinking skills, visual literacy skills, and research techniques so that they understand how best to read the imagery and how best to think critically about how images they take can be used to change the narrative or set the record straight in any different ways that they feel like doing. We wanted to reflect on press photography in Uganda and knowledge about archives, deepen technical cameras knowledge with the students, and develop community-based programs. We initially wanted to do something with refugees because we have been taking in a lot of refugees in Uganda, but because of COVID, we had to change the narrative, and I will get to that as I get into the presentation later on. We wanted to build a program with public dialogues and discussions amongst the student bodies and all that were engaged. And initially, we wanted to do it at the biggest scale with different universities, but we ended up engaging the Department of Journalism and Communication at the Faculty of Makerere University. Now I'm going to go over what the project and the different facets within the projects to try and paint a picture of what we wanted to do with the students. We had 4 different workshops that we were focusing on. In workshop 1, we focused on critical thinking skills, visual literacy, basically how do you think outside the box? How do you think for yourself? How are you able to receive information and look at it critically to assess how it's going to be used by you, or how you are going to produce information and present it to others. Visual literacy skills, how can you read imagery? How can you put imagery forward so that it can be read by everyone, regardless of whether they understand you or are in the same situation? History of African photography, and also how do you research? This was also another way to kind of jumpstart into our next workshop, which was essentially about archives, working with archives to understand our past and figure out how we can then use it to process information better and present it better going forward. Which brings us to activate the archives. We thought about the different creative thinking practices that the participants and the information and the students can actually get through to use and adapt archival materials that they can work with. They did some archival researches. Again, because of COVID, we were not able to do an in-depth deep dive into as many of the archives as we were hoping to do, but we still managed to curate a small quantity of information that they could actually look into and work with for this particular aspect of the workshop. We then went into the technical capacities of how to make images, going from actually developing basic technical skills of understanding how to produce photographs, all the way to how to actually use the photographs to develop narratives. For example, if you want to follow up on the story within your community, how can you best go about it using photography? Then we went on to how to work within a workflow to develop an understanding of how you can build business skills and which can be transferred into the future, how you can pitch a story to future editors. And we actually tried to do as much hands-on as we could, considering that most of it was actually happening online via Zoom. But we did try to get the participants to understand the different facets of this particular workshop. As I mentioned earlier, the first workshop was essentially supposed to be a way of inputting all the information that they had in the third workshop on how to actually develop stories. And the idea was for them to work with communities. Initially, it was supposed to be refugees and how they are adapting, but because of COVID, we tried to keep it as close to home as possible. And within the documenting democracy training, we basically, with last year, there was a lot of work around elections and how we were coming into the 2021 elections, the general elections, and we wanted to see how professional photographers can actually do work within the scope of documenting the news aspect of it. And then we wanted to use the students to bring in the aspect of community photojournalism as well, because community journalism is becoming a bit more and more prevalent with everyone having a smartphone. And we did see during the BBC report on the elections how a lot of footage was actually from every day-to-day citizens that were using their smartphones to collect information and record whatever was happening. So I wanted during this workshop to actually feed through that and work together to build something that can document different facets of what's going on within the electioneering time, and how they are, some people decide to work with how the politicians are actually running the elections during COVID time, how they're dealing with the different, working with SOPs. Some decided to focus on how the LGBT community is actually working with within the political sphere and how they feel about the elections. And some decided to focus on particular politicians and just focus on how they are going and navigating the election period. So all this culminated into a student exhibition that we actually managed to put forward at Makerere University. And within the student exhibition, we actually also organized panel discussions that were coordinated and directed and worked on by actual participants and students within the university. And they actually did a great job. I was hoping to share a video about what happened during that whole period, but I'm out of time. And the last bit of what we did during the program was actually training trainers, basically get a new crop of people who can then push forward, and also working with lecturers at the university so that they can also kind of start inputting or some of the facets of the different activities within their actual programming. But altogether, we think that photography is a very important tool that can be used as evidence and as documenting and as a way of showcasing differences, similarities, just bridging the gap between what we think others are and who we are, and bring us all together. I will wait for questions if anyone wants to get a clearer picture of some of the things that I've talked about, but there was little time, so I'm done here. Valeria?
Thank you very much, Stella. Just for the translator, again, to secure a small balance in language intervention in this panel, I will now switch into French, even though I usually like to give the floor in the same language to the next speaker. So Vincentia, sorry if I will make a small transition into French between the different interventions. Je pense que les interventions de Stella et Lisa.
I think that both Lisa and Stella's presentations are a relevant bridge with Pedro's information and the study carried out on how industrial and creative are supported in sub-Saharan Africa. If we use a body metaphor as a whole entity, you can see that if you suffer from a leg, you start having a limp and you start doing worse. And after hearing Stella, if you take the word WASP in English and GDP, oh, sorry, the word gap in English and the word GDP, gap and GDP, there's just one letter difference. Well, this shows that we're both far away and close to what can be a creative economy, because a creative economy feeds on a whole ecosystem, the community in which it exists. However, the fact of feeding the dimension of intercultural dialogue, as Lisa said, and considering that cultural dialogue is not invented or improvised, it needs to be prepared, and for that purpose you need time. People need to be prepared to intercultural dialogue. The challenge of communication, information, and manipulation, so the link with other sectors such as information and communication, the responsibility of a participatory process in public policies so that project leader experiences can make it possible for regional organizations such as the EU and the African Union, but also the states and local authorities and sub-regional entities and organizations with whom we cooperate. All that is necessary so that no stakeholder is left, also so that we do not leave any part of that body of culture behind. Without further ado, after this short introduction to Vincenza Sciulle's presentation, she will be telling about policies and vision of the African Union on the role of culture in sustainable development of our societies.
Thank you very much, Valerie. My colleagues in the panel, Stella, Lisa, and Peter, and other participants. As AU, we convey our sincere greetings and gratitude for being invited to participate in this panel by Center of Finance of Brussels, Bozar. And to start my presentation, sorry, I realized my video was not on, sorry for that. To start my presentation, I will share the screen. I think we can see it. So I would like to talk about on how the African Union is using policies in order to support the artistic creation, but also to build the social cohesion. And we have some few questions to respond to in terms of policy and instruments at the African Union. How can arts and culture prevent conflict, for example? How can they contribute to social inclusion? And to start, I have to make a statement that the role of culture, arts, and heritage in Africa cannot be underemphasized in conflict prevention and social inclusion. And this is based on the vision and the future on which African Union is looking at through its blueprint document, the African Union Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. And under Aspiration 5, we find out that the document clearly stipulates that arts, culture, and heritage are levers for building the Africa we want, whereby in definition, what does Africa we want in terms of culture, arts, and heritage is to have Africa with strong cultural identity, values, and ethics, but also to strengthen the African cultural identity, values, and ethics as a critical factor for African emergence on the global stage. But also, when we are talking about Africa we want, in terms of culture, arts, and heritage, is to help African people imbued with a sense of their fundamental cultural unity, a sense of common destiny, and African identity and Pan-African consciousness. And we see, when we are looking towards 2063, an Africa where work is a key ethic and value, where women play an important role, and in which traditional and religious leaders, including the youth, as are drivers of change, and their efforts is recognized. And to implement that, we have several key policy documents. And we have the Charter for Cultural Renaissance of 2006. We have a draft of African Union model law on the protection of cultural property and heritage. We also have a revised African Union plan of action on cultural and creative industries, which is also a draft. And we have a statute of the African Audiovisual and Cinema Commission. And we also have a statute of the Great Museum of Africa, which is a flagship project of the African Union Agenda 2063. I will quickly give a short or a brief information of these key policy documents. And for example, the Charter of African Cultural Renaissance has entered into force in 2015. The process started in 2006. And one of the things among many issues which have been prescribed and described in the document is to assert to the dignity of African men and women, as well as popular foundation of their culture, to promote freedom of expression and cultural democracy, which is inseparable from social and political democracy, but also to promote an enabling environment for African people to maintain and reinforce the sense and will for progress and development. So those are key. There are many, but I've chosen the first three ones. And if we look at the African Union model law on the protection of cultural property and heritage, the objectives of this law is to institute, regulate, and strengthen the protection of cultural property and heritage, including those that are yet to be discovered, and to establish the state of ownership thereof. But also these laws applies to the protection and preservation of cultural property and heritage in member states of African Union. The other document is the revised African Union Plan of Action on cultural and creative industries. The document is there to ensure an increase in national budgets and resources allocated by member states to cultural and creative industry by 5% within the first 10 years of implementation. So there's a target there with this document, but also to facilitate the emergence and the growth of cultural and creative industry businesses within member states that are globally competitive, trying to push creativity from Africa to a global stage, but also to increase the innovative use of technologies in Africa's creative sector by 5% within the first 10 years of implementation of this plan. So this plan is very clear on the direction in which African Union and member states see the creative sector, cultural and creative sector in the future. The other document is the Statute of the African Audiovisual and Cinema Commission, which is there to promote research on African audiovisual and cinema industry in collaboration with various institutions to collate, disseminate, and archive the results of audiovisual and cinematic research, to promote and encourage state parties to take all measures in protecting and archiving programs for national film and audiovisual materials, and retrieving those held in foreign lands. The last document is the Statute of the Great Museum of Africa, which is a flagship project of the African Union Agenda 2063. This project is soon to be launched next month. It's a museum situated in Algiers, Algeria, and the government of Algeria, People's Republic of Algeria, has provided a land to construct this Great Museum of Africa, which also in the process of the launch in July, there will be a first continental art exhibition. And to tie up all these documents and activities, I have to talk about what African Union Commission and the member states have been working in to facilitate, popularize, and advocate for this instrument for member states and partners and Pan-African cultural institutions. This year, we are celebrating the Year of Arts, Culture, and Heritage, Levers for Building the Africa We Want, and it is the theme of the year. And what activities have been done since this theme of the year have been launched in February this year? There are several, we have a number of activities. There are almost 60 planned activities to be done with member states, with partners, and with Pan-African cultural institutions. I will just touch on the few which have been done and the few which will be done in the very near future. We had a partners meeting on the theme of the year, but also we had a validation workshop on the revised plan of action, which I've described a few minutes ago. But also we had a joint workshop with the Pan-African Parliament, tried to make sure that our parliamentarians are aware on what arts and culture in Africa scenario and scene is at the moment and the future which lies ahead. But also we heard a joint meeting with ICRC and IPSS on the protection of cultural property and heritage. As I said, we managed to put into force, to enter into force the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance on the 25th of May during the African Day. And we are going to now working on how to operationalize the temporary secretariat of the African Audiovisual and Cinema Commission and to fast track the process of ratification of the Statute of the African Audiovisual and Cinema Commission. And as I spoke earlier on, we are moving to the launch of the first continental exhibition of the Great Museum at the Villa Dutre in Algeria. We are organizing with our partners, Afro-Exim Bank, what is called Creative Africa Nexus, CARNEX Summit, which is an intra-African trade fair to be held towards the end of 2021. But also we are in the process of developing art education policy. We are organizing for the second Luanda Biennale on culture of peace in Luanda, Angola. But also we are going to have a forum of traditional leaders on traditional medicine. And of course, having a workshop on restitution of cultural properties. So this is in a nutshell what we have been doing, and that we are celebrating a year of arts, culture, and heritage. This is activities, and we will appreciate that we have more partners who are joining us in these activities, participating, but also sharing ideas on how best to come up with new projects in the arts, culture, and heritage sector to support the development, social cohesion, and integration of the continent. I thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Vincenza Schule. It was an inspiring intervention, and it showed how much the African Union is investing in culture and creative industries for the identity of the continent. And we are sure that all colleagues from the 35 projects supported by Culture at Work Africa are with you in these efforts, and count on the African Union to implement the plan of action. And I will jump into this idea that you presented to the audience, indeed to underline the notion of partnership. Because as we know, Culture at Work Africa was developed thanks to the support of the European Commission in its development program. We are therefore in the framework of the cooperation for development, but as we are aware, the international cooperation on culture is broader, and indeed it calls for a greater partnership, information exchange, knowledge exchange among different institutions and civil society and administration, including national administration. And therefore, how we create a greater coherence in this disruption, duplication, gap, diversification of action based on the different needs of the sectors, of the audiences, of the actors, that really are a huge perimeter for a greater coherence in the actions of all stakeholders in cultural development. And Pedro's intervention again highlighted the potential. We also developed a panel on this greater coherence where Angela Martins, your colleague, intervened in the 9th of December last year. So what is, for example, in this perspective of international partnership, the role of European member states, the role of cultural diplomacy, cultural cooperation. On this, I would like to give the floor to Gitte Chok. Gitte, I hope that I pronounced it even better this time. And I would like to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Valeria. Yes, I cannot complain. Very well done. Yeah, in any case, I'm very thankful for this invitation and for the introduction. Quite right. I'm going to draw a bit of a bigger picture of cultural relations as we call what we're active in as EU National Institutes for Culture. And cultural relations have a lot to do with intercultural dialogue, social cohesion, and the other topics that we talked about today. And I would like to start by reminding us of how we arrived at this point today. So in general, I'm not an EU representative, but I can honestly say, or I believe in the fact that the EU is quite progressive when it comes to cultural relations. It has also, when you look at the member states of the EU, one of the strongest and one of the most progressive strategies on culture relations, culture in international relations. And so in a nutshell, it is to bring people together to engage in culture, people from different spheres, different countries. And this is how has it arrived at that? It's a process that started years ago, and one of the milestones was in 2016, when the former High Representative or Vice President of the European Union, so the highest diplomat, Federica Mogherini at the time, said that culture has to be part and parcel of our foreign policy. Culture is a powerful tool to build bridges between people. This is why cultural diplomacy must be at the core of our relationship with today's world. And so in 2016, the EU published a strategy or a strategic approach to cultural relations. And this is, I think, also around the time when the call that Culture at Work Africa succeeded at was published. And so it was in a very formative moment of the EU's action in cultural relations. And just to sum up this strategy, it talks about three areas of intervention, intercultural dialogue, and I really like the presentation we heard earlier, it talks about cultural heritage and social cohesion, development, cooperation. So these are the three areas. But what I'm actually more interested about, and what we base our work as UNIC on a lot, is the values that this strategy represents. And these values are the bottom-up approach. It's about mutual listening and learning, creating a spirit of dialogue, and context-driven activities. And I think a lot of these claims I also see realized in the Culture at Work in Africa program. So I'm happy to be here today to discuss the impact culture can have on our relationships with the world as the EU, but also to look at culture as a vector for cohesion, security, and so on. And it was great to see these projects that were realized in, as many as 15 countries. And I liked that in the presentation earlier, we saw so many young people. So I think this also is important to, when we talk about broadening our scope, to include young people. And it's also interesting to see the synergies that can be derived. So the photography project that was presented reminded me of an ongoing UNIC project that is going on in Kinshasa in the DRC with about the same approach to redefine photography and re-own it in the DRC. So the strategy of the EU is based on values, and there's a number of projects that are implementing this strategy. And as EU National Institutes for Culture, so our network brings together those organizations in the member states of the EU that deal on a mission level, sort of that deal with cultural relations, that have that official sort of role. And some of them are a bit more at arm's length to ministries, and some are ministries. So it's a diverse network of organizations that engage in cultural diplomacy and cultural relations. And we do have a global scope as a European network. I will try to interlink it with a couple of examples from outside Africa, as this conversation today is focused on Africa, but synergies can be found elsewhere as well. And so one of the projects that we recently came to a close, or an initial close with, we finished phase 1, is European Spaces of Culture, where we try to identify a model of how to do cultural relations, how to engage in an intercultural dialogue that can be replicated on a larger scale. And so this model of European Spaces of Culture is based on these values, or the principles of cultural relations that I just mentioned: mutual listening and learning, reciprocity, dialogue, and partnership. And it's great to see how, we're not the only ones pushing that agenda forward, but that we have you as potential allies as well. And so what we aim to do is create platforms to bring people together, enabling encounters, and thereby, and this is our motto, creating trust and understanding through culture. And I'm sure this motto can be shared by many of you as well. So I would like to share with you some of the key principles which reflect our learnings from this project, which can be useful when designing future projects. So under European Spaces of Culture, we had 6 pilot initiatives that were happening in the US and Mongolia, but also in West Africa, a couple of countries with a focus on Benin and Ethiopia. And so I tried to come up with 3 major learnings or insights. One, and I'm happy, that Pietro mentioned this, and I think all of the panelists before mentioned that this is important. This shows that it's also being implemented with larger programs like the one we're talking about today. And this is the bottom-up approach. Context comes first. The EU talks about mutual listening and learning, and it sounds so easy, but I think us as Europeans, we need to become better at it. We recently had a conference, and Pedro's co-author of the study, Kimani Njogu, he was very frank when he said, "Are you listening enough, EU?" And his answer was very clear, it was no. So we need to get better at that. And the reason is that an activity is well developed when it is based on local needs, when it clearly is based in the local landscape. Connected to that is, I think, easier access to funding and support. And in my first draft of my notes, I wrote capacity building, because this is, I think, a catchphrase that we've used a lot. You know, I was actually based in DRC when the call came out and looked at it, and I also then saw Culture at Work Africa develop through the years, and I thought, wow, you know, even to apply to this grand scheme, I only know of a handful maximum organizations in the DRC that would be able to do that. And so I think our catchphrase is, so we need to develop capacities so that organizations based in countries of the African continent can apply. And then I thought, this is also kind of strange. I think we need to improve access, or we do need to facilitate easier access to these cultural activities and these cultural opportunities. So the need for a bottom-up approach, that was my first learning. The second one is fair collaboration. I mean, we can only truly implement this bottom-up approach if our entire processes of working are based on what we currently call fair collaboration, but it could also be called fair culture. And this is something that we are working on together with a group of 6 experts. I think some of them are here today as well, to define what kind of parameters we could set up for our own work, parameters and to see, or what do we also need to change in our practice, in our approach, so that what we do in intercultural relations or international relations is fair. And it sounds so easy, but fair already is a word that's very difficult to translate into other languages. But it is about equal access to culture, also south-to-south exchange, something that hasn't been mentioned today. And some of the keywords that we're dealing with is decolonization, racism, climate justice, solidarity, and equity. So we're launching a large crowdsourcing effort to take in as many views as we can. And if you're interested to join this initiative, or our crowdsourcing initiative on fair collaboration, if you have something to say, I'll share a link with you after my intervention where you can do that. And the third learning, or the third keyword that I would like to bring in, is continuity, but also flexibility. I think I mentioned this already, easier access to funding. This is linked to the fact that often EU funds come in large schemes, and it helps to be more flexible, to have small, mid, and big scale projects. And continuity, I think this is probably also something that Culture at Work Africa is facing, that amazing partnerships have been set up, a network has been created, and what happens with it now? And I think it's nice to have projects, but the big disadvantage of projects is that they're limited in time. And if we really talk about professionalizing cultural sectors, we need to have a scheme or a strategy that is mid and long term. So I'm talking 5 to 10 years here, ideally. I know this is hard. This is hard for our work as well, because what we do is also often project-based. But this is also something that came up when we looked at the learnings from European spaces of culture, that is a need that we have to answer ourselves with our own projects. And before I conclude, I would like to share one reflection on shared values. One of the major learnings of European spaces of culture is also that, you know, when we create a space of collaboration and a space of creativity together as these different actors, which Valeria has also said, you know, we are a network of organizations that come more from the public sector, even though some of our members are also civil society organizations. But when we create these open spaces, what we find ourselves under is shared values, such as freedom of speech, tolerism or inclusion, democracy, climate change, multilateralism. This is a project in Sri Lanka that was very clear on the fact that the EU serves as one example of how you can overcome ethnic divides and how multilateralism works. And I think here there's also lots of opportunities for collaboration also with the African Union, as they represent those same values, collaboration. So yeah, culture preventing conflict, culture contributing to social inclusion. All of these questions that you are asking here are also questions we ask ourselves in our network. I just talking about conflict, I do want to point out this, well, Zoom is not catching it. Yeah. This study on working in fragile contexts that we've also ongoing currently, where we specifically look at what kind of impact the cultural relations approach, so this bottom-up approach based on mutuality, what impact that can also have on fragile contexts, on places of conflict, but also on preventing conflict. And so to sum up, we believe that culture creates trust and understanding between peoples of the world. Let's all together make sure cultural exchange continues on the basis of equality of partnership, co-creation, and local consultation. And I think if I could utter one wish at the end of my intervention here, I think we're all converted. I think we all know, also from experience, we know deeply in our hearts that culture can make an impact, a huge impact. And my wish would be that we have more political buy-in from our leaders. And I think this is something that we could all work together who are here from the DGs, from the area of policymakers, culture practitioners, and networks.
Thank you very much, Gitte. I think that you mentioned some quite important buzzword that bring us together in a very short time. So again, to balance the language of the conference for the translators, I will switch into French again, so that we try to be equal on this side too. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Gitte. You brought up a number of buzzwords. And before we move to the round table, I'd like to give the floor to Pedro. I'd like to remind participants that they can ask questions in the chat. We have our teams that are closely monitoring the chat in order to ask questions. I saw a question pertaining to local languages. Cultural at Work Africa wishes to acknowledge local languages. If we're talking about inclusivity in a space as diverse as Africa, as Europe is, it's crucial to pick up on these issues and to highlight the importance of linguistic diversity as well as cultural diversity. All partners must be aware of this. So Gitte addressed a number of issues, among them understanding, mutual understanding. When one speaks of understanding, one speaks about a mutual relationship, a mutual understanding. Whether we're talking about a project that is a regional project or an international project or local project, every stakeholder must be able to take part in the elaboration of the project, and every stakeholder must see his own needs being met. So this fair collaboration is quite a wide-ranging term, I believe, and it should not be restricted to North-South relationships. And I like to break down this silo because in the North and the South, situations can be quite similar, notably in the fight against inequality, and this should be our daily concern if we wish to build a more sustainable world for future generations. First and foremost, we should address the more serious inequalities, and we should, in that regard, support development aid. As for the short-term, long-term issue, this is a topic that Culture at Work Africa wishes to address during this final debate. I can see there is an impetus for this. We have some movements that were born of this project. How can we sustain that impetus How can we move away from survival to durability? How can we make these projects sustainable? And I'd like to pick up on Pedro's study there. We could think about how funding tools and public policies may evolve, those that support cultural policies, but also those that support access to culture, as Gita reminded us. If we want change via culture, we must think on the long term. And to that effect, we need to think about public policy. So I believe we could draw some interesting conclusions from Pedro's study. This is why I wanted to give the floor to Pedro before the roundtable, so you could maybe shed a bit more light on what was said on panelists and give us a general outlook. And you could move from diversity and the multiplication and initiatives and the prism of cultural and creative spaces in the framework of creative territories and creative communities. Would you please tell us what kind of synergies you can identify, what visions you believe are the right ones to adopt, notably the visions that were set out and laid out by Vincenze. Thank you very much. Pedro, the floor is yours.
Hello, Valerie, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Yes, thank you very much again. I'm very comfortable to talk about culture at work. So what I'm going to say is more on the programmatic commitment in the cultural sector towards Africa, not only sub-Saharan Africa now. I constantly work with organizations facilitating strategies and helping them to conceive better programs. For that, I believe it's very crucial to establish a conversation recognizing and being honest and sensitive to economic disparities, conscious and unconscious racism, as well as the different kinds of violences, right? Not only the physical ones, but the economic, the technological, and the technical ones. And to be able to do that, to be able to go through this process, program managers and organizations, they need to have enough time, right, to proceed and process these changes. But these managers and organizations are also and constantly dealing with a short time to prepare, for instance, their proposals to be able to get funds and to be able to develop the programs. So in the end, it's a matter of changing the car tire with the car running. So the car is running, and what can we do? How can we improve in the meantime this car is running? And I connecting now with the panelists, I really liked to see in Lisa's presentations, as well as in Stella's presentations, who was there teaching, who was there exchanging, who was there directly on the ground, bringing the benefit, because we hear quite constantly that it's necessary to build more capacity. And on many occasions, the capacities are already there, and people just need to have the resources to bridge these capacities. I'm trying to avoid using the language of capacity building, because I believe quite a lot that different capacities are there and they need to be bridged. They need to be connected. So now connecting with what Gita and Vicenza, they have said. Vicenza brought a whole interesting policy framework and actions by the African Union, and Gita, in one of her last points, talked about how do we somehow advocate, convince, push our leaders to make them more sensitive about the cultural sector, right? And I do think we need to somehow be able to dialogue with the wider public so that we don't try to convince the ones who are already convinced. I think everyone here, both in the panel and the participants, are really convinced that culture is a driver and enabler, that culture is connected with sustainable development. Even though culture is not clearly there, it is connected with sustainable development in many many SDGs. We all know that. But how do we convince? How do we talk? How do we express that to the wider public? I always mention that I learned quite a lot about sustainable development, green sustainable development, not necessarily by reading policies documents, but by watching videos, short videos, 3, 4, 5 minutes, raising awareness, by talking with people who are able to explain me that, because we know that policymakers and politicians, they are not really interested in reading big and massive documents. And as a researcher myself, I always try to not fight, it's not the word, but convince the ones who I'm going to work with to somehow create different kinds of deliverables so that we are able to talk with those who are in need to learn about it, to reinforce their knowledge, or to be convinced about it. So I wanted to make these final points. As you can see, the sun is really shining here in Berlin today. It's very warm. So I hope you could see me, and I hope you could listen to what I wanted to say. And yeah, the last reminder, do not forget to pressure your government, our government, to distribute these vaccines around the world, right? I think if we need to talk about and if we need to be aware of what is going on now, this is also a very crucial element to resilience, because to when can we be resilient in the developing, so-called developing world without the vaccine, right? So I think the cultural sector has also the obligation as one or perhaps the most affected sector here in Europe to lobby and advocate and to pressure leaders to distribute the vaccine around the globe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Indeed, again, it's an issue of equality, and therefore it should be our collective task. Would any other colleagues and panelists react on each other for 2-3 minutes? Vincentia, Lisa, Stella, and Gita, of course, to give you the floor, for example, on the issue of complementarity of actions and cooperation. We are reminded also by Pedro intervention, and we are very much aware that international cooperation should complement local cultural development, and therefore a call for African leaders and administration to support their own cultural and creative industries, their own cultural actors, activists, journalists, so that there is a local energy that partners can come to support. But then beyond this, and on this, I would like to recall the provision of the 2005 Convention. As I was saying before, the relation between Africa and Europe are not only about cooperation for development, it's also about international cooperation, including between cultural actors to support cultural co-production, cultural distribution, as you were challenging the issue on where do we distribute the content, to what audiences, to what market. But we are very much aware again that access to culture, it's not only about market, it's not only about building audience, it's about audience and public and citizen cultural active participation. So all those are the legs and arms I was talking about before that are making the body of culture, the eyes, the nose, our fingers. We should use all of them to be vibrant and creative. So I saw Gita was willing to react on this, or maybe you raised the hand by mistake. Okay, thank you, Gita, Lisa, Stella, and see Vincenza. So if you allow me, I will first give the floor to Vincenza.
Thank you, Valeria. I would also like to add where Pedro has ended, but also responding also for the issue of indigenous African languages as a crucial element. African Union has established what is called the African Academy of Languages, ACALAN, which is in Bamako, Mali. And one of the objectives of the ACALAN is to promote and develop the use of African languages in general and vehicular cross-border languages in particular, in partnership with the former colonial languages, but also to promote functional multi-languageism, especially in the education sector, but also generally to develop African languages as a factor for African integration and development. On the other side, African Union also has what is called CELTO, Center for Linguistic and Historical Studies, which is in Niger, Niamey, and it promotes African cultures in their richness and diversity and convergency. It's an oversight body to safeguard African cultural heritage, including also languages, and try to see how they promote African history and languages through the collection, conservation, and dissemination of oral tradition. So that is one information also I wanted to share, Valerie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincenza, because I think it answered very well a question from our audience on the issue of cooperation and intercultural dialogue, because this people-to-people exchange, Lisa and Stella, bring us back to what you were discussing at the very beginning. If we want to bring people close within a territory or between continents, we need to provide occasion for them to know each other, work together. So how would you like to see those kinds of dynamics emerge after Culture at Work Africa, and taking maybe away as a legacy towards other institutions, including regional and national African institutions and organizations you work with? What advice would you like to give as a cultural operator?
The first thing I have to bring into attention is the fact that art, culture, and heritage is one of the sectors which are under-budgeted, and they are not, in many African countries, they are not priority sectors. So they depend heavily on donor support, and their existence and support has mainly been on partners who are willing to support the sectors. So working together in the art, culture, and heritage is not by choice, it's a must. There's no way we can operate in isolation with partners and others in the sector, because as I was reading the plan of action on cultural and creative industries, the plan is to increase funding from the central budget to the sector. So this shows, by saying just 5%, for example, right? So you could see how low it is, because it's sometimes less than 1%. So working together is the way to go. And even in initiatives like the Great Museum of Africa, we are strategizing on how to work with other museums across the globe, because you can't establish a Great Museum of Africa in isolation with other existing museums, which also have are hosting African topics. But also, we have to understand the fact that without culture, the culture has always been a culprit of what we call bad practices in Africa. But we normally say those are what we call bad, there's no what is called bad culture. It's bad behavior, because culture has always been transforming itself in order to make a community move. So something culture has been accused. So we are using a lot of energy to show that culture is positive, while people are thinking culture is negative thing and something which is holding the continent back. So those kind of debates, by saying cultural practices are the ones which are hindering development, I think those are narratives which we are supposed to talk about how cultural activities are the vehicles for the development in Africa, to minimize the negativity of the cultures and the sector itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincenza. I think you raised a very important question that I would like to transfer indeed to Lisa and Stella, because for maybe to help to draw some of the first conclusion of this panel, indeed, there is this issue that Predo was also raising in, let's say, going beyond the usual suspects in making the role of culture in development evident for the overall society and therefore beyond the cultural sectors and believers themselves, as we know. And we hope that Culture at Work Africa provided already some evidence. We could bring together other initiatives as the ones supported and led by unique members, by other European Union supported program in Africa, and work alongside with you to develop a kind of narrative that would support this mainstreaming of culture that should be supported not by international cooperation per se, but because it's a priority, we believe, of the people of the continent. And we hear you that you are fully in this direction for the African Union. So Lisa and Stella, for example, as stakeholders in the sector and on the continent, how would you like to address the challenges that you have encountered so far to make the case of culture as a key pillar for development? And how are you dealing after Culture at Work Africa to build on its legacy and the legacy of the projects you have been developing under the program to make the case for culture with your local, national, and regional organization?
Lisa, you want to go first?
I was hoping you would go first.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to, first of all, comment on something that Vincenza said earlier. Vincenza, sorry, I do not know how to pronounce the name, about the negative connotations that come from culture and the misunderstandings that people have of the perceptions that they have of different cultures. And that is one of the things that we do in our project, in our program, want to address. Because when you kind of come in as a documentary photographer and try to understand for yourself as a photographer, understand the differences of a community, let's say, that you're reporting on, and then think about how best to put forward the differences or the things that you learn from that community so that others can also kind of catch a glimpse into said community and hopefully kind of bridge the gaps that we have. I think that is one of the ways that we are trying to kind of change that narrative a little bit. And that is one of the reasons why right now these whole energies are being put forward towards actually giving agency to more on-the-ground African photographers so that they can do more in bridging the gaps that we have in the different corners of the world or of the continent. I'm going to need Valeria to actually repeat the question because now I've kind of lost it because I was kind of focused on the little bit.
Yeah. But you have partially already answered. Indeed, as we know that one of the main challenge that both Pedro and Vincenza from their intervention raised, the difficulties that still persist on the continent to achieve a structural support to cultural and creative industries, but also to cultural participation, active citizenship through culture, including for youth, as an expression of their vision of the future. How did you try to address this negative priority issue so far, and how the projects you develop within Culture at Work Africa is planned to be used in the near future to advocate locally and nationally, for example, for you and Lisa, to develop a local and national support for your activities that can then be supported by international cooperation and international partners, being for reason of cooperation for development or international cooperation joint initiative. But as you are all willing to do, you would like to create sustainable and conducive environment locally for you to act. So how would you like to address those issues to your local administrator, for example? How would you use Culture at Work Africa as an advocacy tool? Yeah, I would say advocacy tool to promote your mission.
I personally think that already with the work that was done and the work that was developed during the program, we are already kind of navigating towards that a little bit, with the trainings that we've done and the projects that were covered that are already shedding light on some of the key elements or key cultural structures within Uganda and because unfortunately the project was centered mostly around Kampala, but essentially that is what we're doing. We are giving agency to young people who can then produce more work that can then be seen. It's like a kind of snowball effect that we're hoping for, just shed light, document, give evidence on what's happening, just snowball effect then kind of grows into something greater. And with regard to kind of the challenges that we have, especially with the funding and everything, we have kind of community or regional programs that we usually run, and one of the ways that we're doing it is with, at least from our project, is like the East African Photography Award, which is now an annual thing that we are running, where we, on a low budget, without having to go through actually engaging or bringing people in, we share our narratives, our different narratives from the different regions. And that's just these small collaborations on a kind of almost grassroots on a regional basis, kind of help to bridge that gap and just working together without thinking too big. Maybe I've done the whole going to Kenya and getting an exhibition, then bring it to Uganda via bus and then taking it back. It's just these little things that we can do to share and just bridge the gaps and bridge the communities. That's essentially what we're doing. And Culture at Work has kind of also helped us to kind of get the next generation kind of feathered a bit so that they can carry on this project and just keep going. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Stella. Lisa, would you like to build on Stella's intervention?
Yeah, sure. And I think I would just like to be the devil's advocate in this regard and not necessarily talk about the legacy of the projects that we have been doing, but rather the threats that are coming through now that seemingly will destabilize the sustainability mechanisms that we had put in place. And I think I would also, in my remarks, also pose a question to Gite. I think it was last week I had a conversation with some cultural operators from the region and beyond. And we're talking about our anxiety with regards to this new wave of COVID and how vaccine diplomacy now seemingly is starting to blur the lines of cultural diplomacy. Because I think one of the challenges that we always have is that in as much as we would want to make a case for culture, there's something else that appears to be a priority. So I think now, is it culture, is it vaccine, what is going to be prioritized? And I think for us, most times, the disadvantages that we tend to have is that we rely on support from governments and international partners with regards to what we can do. So if cultural diplomacy ceases to be a priority and vaccine diplomacy becomes a priority, what does that do to our sustainability? And even in the event where there is vaccine diplomacy and culture still needs to find application, we'll be forced to work within that frame. So it becomes a matter of what do we as cultural operators contribute to the whole initiative of trying to prevent the spread of COVID and ensure that citizens remain in a safe space. So is it culture or it's vaccine? Is it cultural diplomacy or it's vaccine diplomacy?
Thanks, that's a great question. I mean, I'm not an EU diplomat, so I can only answer from my personal or from the network's point of view. And I think, culture is not a priority of the EU international relations. It's just like that. Together with our partners or the interlocutors that we know at EU level, we are all, converted, and we fight very hard for more space for culture in the EU's external action. This is our goal, to make culture a priority, of the EU's partnerships in the world. And I think we've come a long way, but I think we're not where we want to be. And I think in terms of vaccine diplomacy, thanks for bringing that up, because I thought actually Pedro closed with that, and I already wrote him a private comment. And I said, I think this is quite interesting to link sort of the resilience of the cultural sectors to vaccine diplomacy, or to make this claim that we cannot sort of continue with our cultural relations without also taking into account this vaccine strategy and what's so on. And I think Pedro is saying that so that we all join forces to say that these are somehow interlinked. I hope that your anxiety is not become true, that culture will go away from the portfolio of what the EU is doing. And if we see the EU as, us all as Team Europe, it's not, I think our members, we're going to, and us as a network, we're going to continue to work on culture and to work also along these principles that I've mentioned before. These are, in our unique work, these are anchored in our strategic framework. And and this project that I was mentioning, European Spaces of Culture, is sort of implementing and piloting that. I think also when you say that you need the support of governments and international partners, I hope that we can work on this together, because, I think if I were to make an advocacy case for our network, it is that we bring together these two groups. And so we have embassies also as part of our members who just believe also in this cultural relations approach. And with the help of those, we can work together with governments and continue to make a case for cultural policies that need to be put in place in countries. So lots of work to do. And thank you for making the point and for being so frank about it.
Merci beaucoup, Gite et Elisa, pour cet échange.
Thank you, Gite, Elisa, for this final exchange. I think that it draws our collective attention to the fact that culture is a struggle which is never completely won, with occasionally setbacks, as we know, and 2030 agenda, 2063 agenda are unique opportunities to highlight the role of culture in sustainable development. But there is one post, which is 2030, but there's a longer term, 2063, but hopefully we can make sure that after 2030, culture is enshrined in the structural vision of our societies in terms of investment and support, because with a cross-sectoral approach, we might lose our vision if there is no vision, if there's no consistency and no coordination. And with this word, coordination, I would like to give the floor to Mercedes Giovinazzi, Inter's director, who actually was the coordinator of the partnership for all the members of the Culture at Work Africa Consortium. So I will give you the final word at the end of this webinar, whilst inviting participants to share their views, points, and questions on the website of Culture at Work Africa. Mercedes, the floor is yours. Thank you, Valeria, and good afternoon to you all.
Consortium partners for having tasked us at InCharts with these final words, not easy words. We are a little bit late on the schedule, but I think that, the previous sessions have all been very interesting and have shown, I would say, the importance of a project such as ours. Culture at Work Africa, the public value of intercultural dialogue for social cohesion in urban Africa. Between 2018 and 2021, a consortium of 8 international African and European partners with its 3 African associates has worked intensely to make this project happen. We are proud of what we have achieved together, and we are humbled by the acknowledgement that our work has made a difference for the African cultural sector and its professionals. Culture at Work Africa was our response to an open call for proposals launched by DG DEFCO, Development Cooperation, now DG INTPA, International Partnerships, of the European Commission in the framework of the European Union's Global Public Goods and Challenges Program. The call sought proposals that working with and from culture might contribute to enhancing intercultural dialogue as a tool for social cohesion in Africa. We have heard about this all this afternoon. We, and by we, I mean all the consortium partners, worked together hand in hand to design our proposal. And we decided to make a bold move. We opted not to put together a project that would implement ourselves, but rather to put the consortium at the service of African cultural organizations and professionals. In fact, we decided that through the subgranting mechanism, we would fund on-the-ground initiatives that would thus be the responsibility of their project consortia, and that our role as a consortium would be to provide the subgrantees with a set of training and networking activities, but also to accompany them through thorough but affectionate, I would say, monitoring throughout the implementation of their projects. When we submitted our proposal, we were conscious that it would most probably be a proposal that might be defined as different from the rest. And I will never forget the words of one of our partners, and I'm sure that she will know that I am referring to her when she said, "We will all meet again soon once our proposal is selected." And indeed, it was selected. Culture at Work Africa has been a 3-year adventure that has supported 33 projects, as we have heard, involving 84 partners and implemented in 15 sub-Saharan countries, both Francophone and Anglophone. But let me remind us all that these projects were selected from some 500 plus applications, and that this testifies to the need for this sort of support, but also to the richness of the cultural sector in the target countries. It is a thriving sector. It is undeniable. The overall cost of these projects has been some 2.3 million euros, of which a little over 1.6 million of euros is of European Union co-funding, and an average of 50,000 euros of co-funding per project. This gives us an idea of the money that has been involved. But also, I would like to say that each project has been unique in its own special way. Mixed partnerships have tackled a range of issues and themes through diverse methodologies and activities, and they have produced different interesting outputs. In all, the projects have reached some 20,000 beneficiaries. At the start, our main request to the applicants was that their project proposal be original in its approach to culture as a tool for social cohesion. And I think that we have seen and heard today about the differences in the approaches and the diversity and richness of these approaches. And that insofar as possible, the proposal provide added value on three fronts. Through the inclusion of young people. The young people, let's not forget this, are the current most important asset for Africa in terms of its population. That they aim to empower women. Women are one of Africa's assets for entrepreneurship and economic development. That they also foster as much as possible crossover between Anglophone and Francophone Africa. As an essential element to foster structural cooperation and to move beyond what I would call one's own comfort zone. Of course, we also requested that the projects abide by the European Union's requirements. The European Union is the major public funder of development cooperation, and EU funding is public funding. It's European taxpayers' money. It must therefore be spent wisely and with the due sense of responsibility. All the information on the subgranted projects is available in the final publication of the Culture at Work Africa project. This publication not only presents each project in detail, the projects are clustered around main themes related in a clear and graphic way, on the one hand to the SDGs, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, and on the other to the goals of the African Union's 2063 vision. In this way, we offer a visual and user-friendly content with an easily understandable canvas that illustrates how culture contributes to human development. We have also been introduced earlier this afternoon to the Culture at Work Africa digital showcase. Initially, just to remind us all, we were to have two physical exhibitions and final conference, one in Abidjan and another in Brussels. But hey, the pandemic has decided otherwise, and we have thus reverted to digital solutions to share the results of our Culture at Work Africa project. We are happy to have reached the end of this project, proud of how we have managed to weather the storm, and grateful to all the subgrantees for their unrelenting and unwavering commitment to carry out their projects, albeit the extremely difficult circumstances. I would like to share 4 key ideas from the experience that we have gained. The Culture at Work Africa subgranting mechanism has ensured a high return on investment. It is about a cascade structure from the consortium to the subgrantees to the subgranted projects target groups and to their final beneficiaries. And this structure generates a strong multiplier effect, reaching out effectively to remote zones and marginalized segments of the population. But it also supports actions by local operators that respond, as we have heard, to the real needs of the territories, adapted to the local context and situations with a bottom-up approach. And the coaching of cultural operators, both public and private, allows for a learn-by-doing practice with an empowering effect for future sustainability. Capacity building improves the administrative, financial, managerial capacities of organizations, but also fosters the understanding of the transversal approaches possible through and with culture, and necessary, absolutely necessary for systemic development. Regional collaboration that we have also pushed for enables for a better understanding of the territories, the sector and the sector's needs, also because it exposes the operators to new and innovative work modalities. Notwithstanding this, there is a drawback, and we have also heard about this afternoon. We have indeed helped cultural operators to carry out their work and also to open up their often limited horizons, which are the results of the constraints they face stemming from the political and social context in which they evolve. This ballon d'oxygène is extremely positive, but can, however, create a sense of frustration once the funding is over. Operators might tend to feel that the opportunities for them to continue working are actually taken away. Therefore, the challenge is to accompany them and if you allow me, I would use the term also humanely, to accompany them humanely in building their social and political awareness as to the role that they must play as advocates for the design of targeted cultural policies in their countries, and also in identifying the possible paths for the further development of their organization. Simply put, I would say it is for them to become active, participative, and constructive actors of their scenes. As regards cooperation, the second element, Culture at Work Africa has supported a much needed mix and transversal approach involving local authorities, public bodies, NGOs, CSOs, and the media, with the potential to influence the design of local and national public cultural policies, but also to enable the sector and its operators to play an active role in governance systems. Thirdly, Culture at Work Africa has implemented a rights-based approach as regards cultural, civic, social, political, and economic rights. Culture is a vector to support gender equality, for instance, but also young women's empowerment as crucial assets to sustain development. But as we have said already, professional capacity building of cultural operators and creative operators is also a means to ensure decent employment opportunities. And finally, active participation in the dialogue on policymaking is a necessary condition for good governance. As a fourth and last item, Culture at Work Africa has strived to defend that culture has an intrinsic public value with an unquestionable potential to foster active and participative citizenship and to sustain regional integration and stability. During the pandemic, that is hopefully finally coming to an end, we all cross our fingers, we have seen a spectacular rise in the use of digital instruments and tools. However, as has been said already also today, digital offers an unquestionable potential, but it has certain drawbacks because it conveys, it implies, it carries on an extremely high risk of increasing the divide between the poor and the rich, between those that are literate and those that are illiterate. And we must all be conscious of this. And we should not forget this and must continue to defend the idea that culture must be at the service of a democratic development. Having said this, and with no further ado, it is always sad to end a project, and even more one such as Culture at Work Africa. I have been tasked by the consortium with these final words, and they cannot be also of gratitude. Of gratitude to the European Commission for its unwavering support since the very beginning. They believed in us and in our approach. And also during the difficult times of the pandemic, there has always been kind and attentive advice for us, and we hope that our work contributes to visualizing the strategic role that culture plays in EU development cooperation strategies. Our gratitude also goes to the Culture at Work Africa subgrantees, the leaders and the partners of the subgranted projects. It has been a privilege to work with all of you, and you all testify to the richness, diversity, professionalism, and in this last year of pandemic, also to the resilience of the African cultural sector. Some of you are now going to be funded or are already, in the funnel for funding by the ACP EU Culture Program regional hubs. This is a confirmation of your potential. And I think the consortium will join me in saying, please keep it up. Do not forget that you are there and that you can make a difference. Of gratitude to the Culture at Work Africa's associate partners, the African Center for Cities and the School of Architecture, Planning and Geomatics at the University of Cape Town, the Economic Community of West African States, the Center for Linguistic and Historical Studies through Oral Tradition, that have been with us for the evaluation sessions of the call for proposals, but also during several of our activities in Africa in particular. Of gratitude to the Culture at Work Africa Consortium partners, and if you bear with me, I would like to thank them individually. Jordi Pasquale and Sarah Vieux of the UCLG Committee on Culture. The final publication has your intellectual and professional imprint and is a legacy of our joint work with Culture at Work Africa. Frédéric Musev, Elena Aquilo, Olga Briard, and before them, Kathleen Leuf, Bozar, they have ensured, as we have seen the visual documentation of the subgranted projects for the exhibition digital showcase, that will also be a legacy of the project and have organized this final event. Michel Sabat, Serave Afrique, and Farai Mfunya and Rachel Yoga, Culture Fund of the Zimbabwe Trust, they have ensured with their work the success of the first networking event in Ouagadougou and of the second networking event in Harare, both from an institutional point of view, anchoring the events in the realities of the two countries, but also as an important training and exchange experience for the Culture at Work Africa subgrantees. Pierre Clavé Mabiala, and before him Dave Vudza, Arterial Network, for having actively spread Culture at Work Africa in the continent and for the success of the final event and showcase in Abidjan. Celia Fischer and Davide Grosso, IMC, International Music Council, for taking on the organization of Culture at Work Africa's song contest. Now, because we haven't said it today, but we have had a contest and we have a Culture at Work Africa rap jingle. We have an awardee that we have had also with us at one of the final events, and for having organized the final event from Paris. Valeria Marcolin, you have moderated the whole of this afternoon. Culture et Développement, you have a truly European-African vocation and have contributed to giving flesh to Culture at Work Africa, and you have stepped up whatever needed, in particular for the training and networking activities. Thank you very much. And of course, last but not least, my colleagues at InterArts who have been involved with me in this incredible project. I will thank them one by one, but before, let me say that throughout we have all been conscious that Culture at Work Africa implied that InterArts takes on an enormous responsibility, in particular from the financial perspective. My gratitude to Antonio Gucciardo, who with his legal and financial expertise and his profound sense of responsibility, for which I cannot be but extremely grateful, has guaranteed a major feat. Let me underline it, that we do everything the right way, always as must be. Cristina Bosch, who has ensured the Culture at Work Africa project, for her positive approach and always constructive solutions, and for her unfailing smile, also in the worst of times. Viviana Babon, who has taken care of the communication of the project with a remarkable sensitivity for the messages and images to represent us. Valérie Wertz, who has taken care of all the administrative aspects of this complex initiative with her infinite patience and profound rigor. And Claudia Rossignoli, who was at the very beginning and who through her extremely efficient coordination ensured that our proposal reaches the end and was submitted. It is time to say goodbye. And I thank all of you who have been with us today for this Culture at Work Africa final event. Let me also thank the interpreters for being with us today and for helping us understand each other. It is always an important task, the one that you deliver. I am sure that we will meet again soon for other adventures, such as the recently launched ACP EU Culture Créé en Afrique project, in which some of us are actively involved and through which we will support the cultural and creative sectors in Central Africa. And as we say in Spanish, muchas gracias por vuestra atención y hasta pronto. Take care.